Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in fairy tale and got married to Erza, Kagura, and Ultear? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Eye of the Storm. The rain fell in a cold, relentless sheet, turning the forested highlands of northern Fury into a slick mire of mud and stone. It was a miserable night, the kind that made honest folk bolt their doors and huddle close to their hearths. For the men of the Iron Vulture Syndicate, it was supposed to be a night of celebration. They had successfully plundered the royal treasury transport from Seven, and the spoils, jewels, gold, and a particularly curious lacrima artifact, were now safely stowed within their mountain fortress. The storm was their shield, a guarantee that no guild, not even the Magic Council's Rune Knights, would dare attempt an assault. They were wrong. Inside the fortress, a hulking man with a jaw like a shovel slammed his tankard down, sloshing cheap ale onto the rough-hewn table. "To us," he bellowed, his voice echoing over the raucous laughter of 100 other thieves and disgraced mages. "And to the storm that keeps the dogs at bay." A cheer went up, loud and boisterous. None of them noticed the sentry outside the main hall fall, not with a cry, but with a silent, heavy thud. None of them saw the shadow that detached itself from the deeper gloom of the corridor. In the eastern watchtower, 2 guards were playing a lazy game of cards, their crossbows leaning against the wall. One of them grunted, looking out the narrow slit of a window. "See anything?" "Nothing but rain and misery." His companion grumbled, tossing a card down. "Hurry up, I'm winning." A floorboard behind them creaked. It was the only warning they got. Before they could turn, 2 identical figures shimmered into existence from the shadows. One guard was struck at the base of the neck, his world dissolving into blackness. The other felt a hand clamp over his mouth, another pressing a single, precise point on his back. His body went limp, paralyzed but conscious, and he was lowered gently to the floor, his eyes wide with terror. The 2 figures, both with sun-blonde hair and clad in simple, dark traveling clothes, shared a nod. They were solid, real, yet they moved with an unsettling synchronicity. Then, with a soft popping sound, they dissolved into plumes of smoke. Miles away, perched atop a jagged outcrop of rock overlooking the fortress, a third figure sat in a meditative pose, seemingly oblivious to the driving rain that plastered his golden hair to his brow and soaked his orange and black coat. His eyes were closed, but he saw everything. He saw through the eyes of the 2 clones that had just neutralized the watchtower. He saw through the dozen others that were systematically, silently, and non-lethally disabling every sentry post, every patrol, and every guard on the fortress perimeter. They moved with the cold efficiency of a surgeon's scalpel, exploiting blind spots, using the roar of the storm to cover their movements. This was Arashi Uzumaki. To the handful of people who had survived his attention, he was known only as the Golden Storm, a solitary mage whose power defied classification. To himself, he was a ghost, a man living a second life he had never asked for, burdened by the memories of a world long since turned to dust. His clones were his eyes and ears, an extension of his will, his chakra, a simple, elegant technique that the mages of this world, with their flashy, explosive spells, could never seem to comprehend. The Y saw it as some high-level duplication magic, but it was so much more. It was a part of him. Perimeter secured, the thought came, a whisper of information from a dissipating clone. 72 hostiles in the main hall. Drunk, unaware. 30 more in the barracks. The target artifact is in the vault below the command chamber. The leader, a man named Grawl, is there, studying it. Arashi's eyes opened. They were a startling, piercing blue, ancient and weary. He pushed himself to his feet, the rainwater sluicing off his coat. He had no guild, no master, no grand cause. He simply took jobs that paid well and, if he was lucky, aligned with the tattered remnants of the code he'd forged in another lifetime. This job was simple. Retrieve the Eye of the Ancients, for a wealthy historian. The Dark Guild was just an obstacle. He drew a deep breath, and for a moment, the air around him seemed to thicken. He wasn't gathering Ethernano from the atmosphere, as the mages of Earthland did. He was Wing in the very essence of the world itself, natural energy. The faint orange pigmentation that dusted the corners of his eyes became more pronounced, his pupils shifting from round to the horizontal bar of a toad. Sage mode. The world exploded into clarity. He could feel the life force of every man in the fortress, the panicked thrum of the paralyzed guard's heart, the arrogant pounding of the leaders. He could feel the storm, not as wind and water, but as a vast, churning symphony of natural energy. He became one with it. He took a single step off the 1,000-foot cliff. He didn't fall. He vanished. Inside the main hall, the party was reaching its peak. Grawl, the syndicate's leader, had promised to join them soon. One of the men, drunker than the rest, staggered toward the massive double doors, fumbling with the latch. "Gonna go take a piss in the storm," he declared. He heaved the heavy oak door open, and the roar of the wind and rain swept in, guttering half the torches in the hall. But it wasn't the wind that silenced the room. It was the man standing there. He was framed by the maelstrom, lightning flashing behind him, casting his silhouette in stark relief. His blonde hair was whipping in the wind, his expression utterly serene. The drunken thief stared, his stupor evaporating. Who the hell are you?" Arashi didn't answer. He took a step inside, the door swinging shut behind him with a deafening boom. 100 pairs of eyes were now fixed on him. 100 men, many of them mages, were reaching for swords or flexing their hands, magical auras beginning to glow. One man, a mage with fire-red hands, scoffed, stepping forward. "You've got a death wish, kid." He thrust his hands out, and a torrent of flame erupted, roaring toward Arashi. Arashi didn't move. He simply raised one hand. The air in front of him shimmered, and a swirling vortex of wind, no bigger than his palm, spun to life. The torrent of fire slammed into it and was instantly shredded, torn apart and dispersed into harmless flickers of heat. A collective gasp went through the room. "My turn," Arashi said, his voice calm and even. In the blink of an eye, 24 clones materialized throughout the hall. They appeared on tables, behind pillars, in the rafters. The room descended into chaos. Men screamed, swinging wildly. Spells of earth, ice, and light erupted, but the clones were ephemeral, dissolving into smoke only to reappear elsewhere. It wasn't a fight, it was a masterclass in confusion. While the hall was a whirlwind of panic, the real Arashi moved. He was a blur, weaving through the brawl untouched. His movements were economical, brutal. A chop to the neck here, a kick to a knee there. He wasn't trying to kill them. He was just taking them apart. In the command chamber one floor below, Grawl felt the vibrations. He was a large man, his body covered in crude magical tattoos that pulsed with a dull, purple light. He looked up from the artifact on his desk, a multiface Ted crystal that seemed to absorb the light around it. "What is that noise?" he growled. The door to his chamber flew off its hinges, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Arashi stood in the doorway, his eyes locked on Grawl. The orange markings around his eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. Grawl sneered, rising to his feet. He was a head taller than Arashi, and twice as wide. "So, the client sent a rat. I am Grawl of the Earth Crushers. My magic will grind your bones to dust." He stomped his foot, and the stone floor churned, spikes of rock erupting toward Arashi. Arashi sidestepped the first, vaulted over the second, and ran straight up the side of the third, his feet clinging to the stone as if it were flat ground. He launched himself into the air, his right hand cupped. A ball of pure, rotating energy, like a miniature hurricane, screamed to life in his palm. It was a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the air. "Rasengan. What is that spell?" Grawl bellowed, throwing up a thick wall of stone. The Rasengan hit the wall, and for a second, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like grinding galaxies, the stone wall didn't just break, it was pulverized, exploding outward in a spiral of dust and shattered rock. Growl's eyes widened in disbelief just before the sphere of chaotic energy slammed into his chest. The impact didn't throw him back. It drilled into him, the rotational force ripping through his magical defenses, his enchanted tattoos, and his flesh. He let out a choked scream as he was sent spinning through the air, crashing into the far wall with enough force to crack the foundation. He slid to the floor, unconscious, his chest a mess of spiraling bruises. Arashi landed lightly, the Rasengan dissipating from his hand. He glanced at the unconscious form of Grawl, then walked over to the desk and picked up the Eye of the Ancients. It was cold to the touch. Job done. He was about to turn and leave when a massive explosion rocked the entire fortress, far larger than anything he had caused. It came from the main gate. Arashi's sensory abilities, heightened by Sage Mode, flared. He felt new presences. 4 of them. No, 5. One was small, almost like an animal. But the other 4, their magical power was immense, vibrant, and utterly distinct. One burned like a chaotic bonfire. One was as cold and sharp as a glacier. One was familiar, a brilliant, star-like energy he felt he'd known before. And the fourth was an iron wall of righteous power. Fairy tale, a clone reported from the outer wall before it dissipated. They've just breached the main gate. Arashi sighed. Complications. He had wanted a clean, quiet job. He tucked the artifact into an inner pocket of his coat. He could just leave. His work was done. But the familiarity of that one magical signature, it tugged at something deep within him, a memory from a life of pain and servitude he had long since buried. Curiosity, he mused, was a dangerous thing. It was also one of the few things that still made him feel alive. He walked out of the ruined command chamber, heading toward the source of the commotion. I'm all fired up now. Natsu Dragneel roared, his fists wreathed in flame. He smashed his fist into the face of a terrified Iron Vulture mage, sending him flying. That's what you get for stealing. Natsu, try not to destroy the entire fortress. We need to find their leader and the artifact. Lucy Heartfilia called out, her celestial spirit, Taurus, cleaving through a group of thieves with his massive axe. Ice make. Lance. Grey Fullbuster shouted, Avo. Lee of ice spears shooting from his hands, pinning a squad of enemies to a wall by their clothes. As usual, he was shirtless, despite the cold and rain. Keep moving. They're disorganized. They were more than disorganized. They were terrified. Fairy Tale had expected a fight. Instead, they'd found a nest of panicked men, half of whom were already unconscious or nursing injuries. It was like walking into the aftermath of a bar fight. Not a defended fortress. And then there was Erza Scarlet. She moved with a grace that belied the heavy plate of her Heart Crew's armor. Her sword was a silver blur, striking with the flat of the blade. Her blows precise and incapacitating. She was a force of nature, her scarlet hair a banner of defiance in the gloom. But her brow was furrowed in concentration. Something was wrong. The resistance was too weak. It felt like someone had already swept through this place. Something isn't right, she said, her voice sharp and clear over the din. She parried a Asperite sword thrust from a large brute and disarmed him with a flick of her wrist. Their command structure is gone. They're just running scared. As if to punctuate her point, the fighting died down. The remaining members of the Iron Vulture Syndicate had either been knocked out or had thrown down their weapons, cowering in corners. The entire battle had lasted less than 10 minutes. Well, that was easy, Natsu said, sniffing the air. Too easy. I smell something else, though. Something weird. Like wind and frogs. Frogs? Lucy asked, looking bewildered. Suddenly, a calm voice cut through the air from the grand staircase at the far end of the hall. You're late. They all turned. A man stood there, descending the stairs with a measured, unhurried pace. He was the one from the storm, the one Natsu had smelled. His golden hair was damp, and his black and orange coat was dark with rain. His face was calm, but his blue eyes held an unnerving intensity, scanning over each of them. Who are you? Erza demanded, leveling her sword at him. Her voice was steel. Are you with this guild? No, the man said simply. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, making no move to defend himself. I was hired to retrieve an item they stole. I'm just finishing up. Natsu's eyes narrowed, his fists clenching. You took all the fun for yourself. Fight me. The man's gaze flicked to Natsu, and for a fleeting second, a flicker of amused nostalgia crossed his features. It was there and gone so fast they might have imagined it. I'm not interested in fighting children. Natsu's temper flared. What did you call me? He lunged forward, his fist igniting. Fire Dragon's iron fist. He was impossibly fast, but the blonde man was faster. He didn't dodge so much as sway, Natsu's fiery fist passing harmlessly by his ear. With a fluid motion, He caught Natsu's wrist, twisted, and used the Dragon Slayer's own momentum to spin him around, ending with Natsu's arm locked behind his back and his face pressed against the cold stone floor. It was over before Gray or Lucy could even react. Natsu! Lucy cried out. Let him go, Erza commanded, taking a threatening step forward. The man, Arashi, held Natsu in place with casual ease. Control your friends, he advised, his voice still level. I have no quarrel with Fairy Tail. He released Natsu, who sprang up, rubbing his shoulder and grumbling. But a newfound caution had entered his eyes. He had been neutralized effortlessly. Arashi's gaze then settled on Erza. He studied her, from the intricate armor to the unwavering determination in her brown eyes. That magical signature, it was so strong, so familiar. He had felt it once before, a flickering candle of defiance in a sea of despair. In the Tower of Heaven, a sleeve on his coat had been torn during his brief fight with Grawl, exposing a small patch of skin on his forearm. On it was a faded, ugly mark, a stylized R that had been branded into his flesh years ago. Erza's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, caught the detail. Her breath hitched. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the rain and Natsu's complaining fading into a dull roar. She had the same mark, hidden beneath her armor. A relic of a past she fought every day to overcome. But she had never seen it on anyone else who had escaped. Not a single one. Her hand, the one holding her sword, began to tremble. Her expression of stern authority crumbled, replaced by a shocking vulnerability. That mark, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Arashi's gaze softened. He slowly, deliberately, pushed up his own sleeve, revealing the brand completely. He then looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. He saw the flicker of recognition, the wave of pain and memory that washed over her face. He had been a boy then, small and fierce, always trying to protect the younger children, always getting beaten for it. He remembered a little girl with brilliant red hair who had shared her stolen crust of bread with him after one such beating. Erza, he said, and the name felt strange on his tongue after so many years. He hadn't known it then. Old man Rob had just called her, the red-haired one. Tears welled in Erza's eyes, her iron composure shattering like glass. She took a stumbling step forward, then another. The sword slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly on the stone floor. You, she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. You were there, in the cell, with the others. You tried to fight the guards. I remember, Arashi said quietly. I remember you gave me your bread. That was all it took. The dam broke. Erza closed the distance between them, not as Titania, the queen of the fairies, but as a lost child finding a piece of her broken past. She wrapped her arms around him, her armored form rigid, but her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Arashi stood stiffly for a moment, the unexpected contact foreign and startling. He had spent years cultivating a wall of detachment, but the feeling of her embrace, the raw, unfiltered pain and relief pouring from her, chipped away at that wall. He slowly raised his arms and rested them on her back, a gesture of comfort that felt both ancient and new. He remembered a promise he'd made to a pink-haired boy in another life, to never let his comrades suffer alone. He had failed so many times. Perhaps this time could be different. Natsu, Gray, and Lucy watched in stunned silence. They had never seen Erza like this. Never. From the rain-swept shadows of a high archway, another figure watched the scene unfold, her presence completely masked. Her face was hidden by a dark cloak, but her single visible eye was wide with a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Ultear Milkovich. She hadn't come for the iron vultures. She had been tracking whispers of a new, exceptionally powerful magic user for weeks on behalf of Crime Sorcier. When she felt that specific energy signature spike in this area, she had to see for herself. It was a fool's hope, a.g. host from her childhood she thought long dead. She had been a child in the Tower of Heaven, too, before she was taken by Brain. A lonely, bitter, broken thing. She remembered a blonde boy, slightly older, who was relentlessly defiant. He wasn't like the others who cried or gave into despair. He fought, and one day, he'd found her crying in a dark corner after a particularly cruel experiment from the guards. He hadn't said much. He'd just sat with her, and pressed a small, clumsily carved wooden bird into her hand. It was the first act of unconditional kindness she had ever known. She had kept it until the day Grimoire heart fell. And now, here he was. Alive, embracing Erza Scarlet, another specter from that hell. The energy pouring from him, it was the same. That strange, warm, vital power that felt nothing like the magic of this world. It was chakra, a word she hadn't even thought in over a decade. A storm of shame, guilt, and a terrifying sliver of hope warred within her. He was here, he was good, and she had become a monster. She had helped Jelil, the very man who had orchestrated their suffering. She had manipulated time, played with lives, and drowned the world in tears. She was unworthy to even stand in his presence. He suddenly stiffened in Erza's embrace. His head turned, his impossibly sharp blue eyes, now with those strange orange markings fully visible, peering directly into the shadows where she stood hidden. He saw her, he felt her, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was exposed. He would see her sins, see the darkness clinging to her soul. He would hate her. Erza pulled back, her composure slowly returning as she wiped at her eyes. She followed his gaze. What is it? Arashi didn't look away from the shadows. His voice was low, laced with a sorrow that cut Ultear to the core. I know you're there. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the rain. Then, Ultear slowly stepped out of the darkness, her hood falling back to reveal her face. She looked pale, her expression a mask of pain and self-loathing. Gray's eyes widened. Ultear. He dropped into a defensive stance. What are you doing here? Ultear ignored him. Her attention was fixed entirely on Arashi. She couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze, staring instead at a point on the floor between them. Arashi's expression was unreadable, but there was no anger in it. Only a profound, aching sadness. He took a step toward her, and she flinched back as if struck. Ultear, he said, his voice gentle. He didn't say her name like an accusation. He said it like a lament. He remembered her, too. A small, dark-haired girl whose magic felt twisted and broken, even then. He saw the path she had walked, not in detail, but in the aura of regret that clung to her like a shroud. He saw the woman she was now, fighting for redemption, and the broken child she had been. He offered no judgment, no condemnation, just a sad, quiet understanding that was more devastating to her defenses than any attack. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart trembled. She had expected rage, disgust, hatred. She had prepared for it. She had no defense against forgiveness. She started, her voice cracking. I didn't know you were alive. Neither did I, Arashi replied, a statement that held a universe of meaning none of them could possibly understand. He glanced between Erza, a pillar of strength forged in the same fire that had scarred him, and Ultear, a victim who had become a villain and was now clawing her way back to the light. Two ghosts from his first days in this strange, new world. His path had been a solitary one for so long. Now, in the heart of a ruined fortress, it had just violently collided with its own past. After a tense and confusing expel, a nation relayed to Master Makarov via a communication lacrima, a fragile truce had been settled. Team Natsu was to escort Arashi, and the now recovered artifact, back to Magnolia. Ultear, after a strained conversation where Arashi simply told her, your path is your own, but you don't have to walk it alone, had vanished back into the shadows, promising to be in touch. Her departure left a heavy, unspoken weight in the air. While Fairy Tail's mages secured the remaining, now compliant, thieves for the Rune Knights, Arashi did his own sweep of the fortress. He wasn't looking for more treasure. He was looking for answers. The efficiency of the Iron Vultures was one thing, but Grohl's confidence, the way he had studied the artifact, it felt like more than simple greed. His sage mode was still active, and it led him to a section of the lower levels that felt cold. It was a dead zone in the symphony of life energy he could normally feel. He found a wall that looked solid but felt hollow to his senses. Placing a hand on the stone, he channeled a small, controlled pulse of chakra. The wall crumbled inward, revealing a hidden passage. The air that wafted out was stale and smelled of ozone and incense. He stepped through, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. It was a chapel, but it was like no chapel he had ever seen. There were no statues, no ornate decorations. The room was stark, carved from black basalt. The only feature was a massive, circular symbol inscribed on the floor in the far wall. It was an Ouroboros, a serpent eating its own tail, but within the circle was a complex, geometric pattern that seemed to pull at the light. In the center of the room, slumped against a stone altar, was a man in the simple, gray robes of a zealot. He was dying. A stray piece of shrapnel from Rashi's earlier fight had torn through the wall and struck him. His breathing was a wet, ragged gasp. Arashi approached cautiously. This man wasn't a thief or a mage from the syndicate. He felt different. His life force was faint, but it was imbued with a chilling, fanatical resolve. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy with pain, but they focused on Arashi with a horrifying clarity. He saw the orange markings around Arashi's eyes, the sheer, overwhelming presence of his natural energy. A broken, gurgling sound escaped the man's lips. It might have been a laugh. "So, it is you," he wheezed. A trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. The anomaly. The cosmic error. Arashi knelt beside him, his expression grim. "Who are you?" "I am a servant of the true order," the man rasped. His eyes burning with feverish light. "The natural cycle, life, and death. Anksaram's law is absolute." Anksaram. The name sent a chill down Arashi's spine. He knew it from the scattered books he had read. The infamous god of the curse that afflicted the black wizard Zirf. "You came from beyond the veil," the zealot continued, his voice growing weaker. "A soul that should have been extinguished. Reborn in a world not your own. You are a blasphemy against the great design. Your very existence is a crack in the firmament." Arashi's blood ran cold. This man, this dying fanatic, knew. He didn't know the details. Not about the shinobi world or the Nine Tails, but he knew the fundamental truth. Arashi did not belong here. "How?" Arashi asked, his voice low and dangerous. The man smiled, a bloody, triumphant expression. "Our God is silent, but he is not blind. He feels the discordant notes in his creation. And we are his silence. We are the Silentium Dei." He coughed, a violent, body-racking spasm. "We were only here to observe, to confirm the whispers. But you are so much more potent than we imagined. My report is sent. They will know." "Who is they?" Arashi pressed. "The hand of God is coming," the zealot whispered, his eyes losing focus. "He will unwrite you. He will purge your taint, and all who are stained by it." His head fell to the side, his last breath a faint, rattling sigh. The chilling conviction in his eyes was gone, replaced by the empty stillness of death. Arashi remained kneeling for a long moment, the man's words echoing in his mind. Silentium Dei, the silence of God, the anomaly. He had fought madmen, monsters, and would-be gods in his last life. He had thought, perhaps, he might find some measure of peace in this one. It seemed he had been naive. He had not escaped his fate as a magnet for trouble. He had only changed the battlefield. And the final words, "and all who are stained by it." A cold dread washed over him. He thought of Erza, of Ultear. He had just reconnected with his past, and already, a new, unseen enemy was threatening to turn them into targets. He rose to his feet, the serenity of his sage mode replaced by grim resolve. He glanced one last time at the strange, cold symbol on the wall before turning and walking out of the hidden chapel, sealing the entrance behind him with a small, precise application of earth-style chakra, turning the rubble to solid stone. When he rejoined the fairy tale mages, his expression was once again a mask of calm composure. But behind his eyes, a storm was gathering. The journey to Magnolia was a strange affair. Natsu, after his initial defeat, kept shooting Arashi challenging glares, but a single, level look was enough to make him back down, much to Lucis' amazement. Gray was wary but pragmatic, asking pointed questions about Arashi's magic, which Arashi answered with vague, unhelpful descriptions like, a manipulation of internal and external energy. Lucy, for her part, was simply trying to process the emotional whiplash of seeing Erza, their unshakable Titania, break down. And then there was Erza. She walked beside Arashi, the two of them wrapped in a comfortable silence. The initial, overwhelming flood of emotion had subsided, leaving a deep, quiet connection in its wake. They didn't need to speak of the tower. The shared scars, the memories that flickered in their eyes when they caught each other's gaze, were a language all their own. For the first time since her escape, Erza felt that a piece of her fractured childhood had been returned to her, not healed, but acknowledged. And for Arashi, the gnawing loneliness that had been his constant companion for a decade had lessened, replaced by the tentative warmth of a rediscovered bond. They arrived at the outskirts of Magnolia as the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. The storm had long since passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. In the distance, the whimsical, towering spires of the fairy tale guild hall stood silhouetted against the vibrant sky. "There it is," Erza said softly, a hint of pride and love in her voice. "Home." Arashi stopped, his gaze fixed on the building. "Home." The word resonated deep within his soul, stirring memories of a bustling village, of ramen stands, of faces he would never see again. He had built a home once, and lost it. He had spent this second life as a wanderer, a ronin without a master, keeping the world at arm's length to avoid the pain of loss. But now, looking at the guild hall, at the determined scarlet-haired woman beside him, and thinking of the broken soul fighting for redemption in the shadows, he felt a pull he hadn't experienced since he was a genin dreaming of becoming Hokage. It was the pull of belonging. "It's a strange-looking place," he commented, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. Erza smiled back. "It's full of strange people. You'll fit right in." She looked at him, her expression serious once more. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Arashi." He met her gaze, and in that moment, he made a decision. He would accept her offer. He would see where this new path led. But as he looked at the welcoming lights of Magnolia, the dying zealot's words echoed in his memory. "The hand of God is coming. Your blasphemous existence will be unwritten." A new threat was coming for him. A threat born from the very laws of this world. And if he chose to call this place home, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would be painting a target on its back. The golden storm had arrived in Magnolia, and he was dragging a far darker tempest in his wake. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Scarlet Steel, Crimson Moon. The inside of the fairy tale guild hall was exactly as chaotic as Arashi had anticipated, and yet, profoundly different from anything he'd ever known. The air was thick with the smell of spilled ale, wood smoke, and 100 different clashing magical auras. A chair flew through the air, trailing glittering ice particles, only to be incinerated by a passing jet of fire. Men and women laughed, fought, and drank with a familial camaraderie that was as fierce as it was baffling. It wasn't a military force like Konoha's shinobi corps, it was a force of nature, a barely contained hurricane of loyalty and emotion. Arashi stood on the second-floor balcony, leaning against the railing, a quiet island in the sea of pandemonium. He had been in Magnolia for 3 days. 3 days of observing, of learning the strange, unspoken rules of this new family. Makarov Drayar, the guild's diminutive but spiritually immense master, had welcomed him with a shrewd, knowing eye, granting him provisional status while the formal registration with the Magic Council was pending. "It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" He didn't turn. He had sensed Erza's approach, her powerful, disciplined aura a stark contrast to the riot below. She came to stand beside him. Her normal armor replaced by a simple blouse and skirt, her scarlet hair tied back. For the first time, he could see the faded brand on her own arm, a mirror of his own. "They're loud," Arashi commented, his gaze fixed on Natsu, who was now trying to eat Gray's ice projectiles. Erza let out a soft laugh. "They are, but they are also the most loyal people you will ever meet. They would die for each other." "I've seen that before," Arashi said, his voice distant. "It's a rare thing, and it invites trouble." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Erza glanced at him, her expression softening. She didn't press for details about his life after the tower. She understood, on a fundamental level, that his solitude had been a shield. Now that he was here, she was content to let him lower it at his own pace. "You've been challenged by Natsu 7 times, she noted, a hint of amusement in her voice. "And dodged 6 thrown barrels from Kana. The boy with the pink hair is persistent," Arashi conceded. "He reminds me of someone I used to know." He thought of his younger self, brash and desperate for acknowledgement. He saw the same fire in Natsu, but untempered by the loss and tragedy that had defined his own youth. Down below, Natsu finally spotted him. "Hey, spiky hair, you can't hide up there forever." Get down here and fight me. Arashi simply raised an eyebrow. He made a single, almost imperceptible hand sign. Below, another Arashi, a perfect, solid duplicate, popped into existence right behind Natsu. The clone clapped a hand on the Dragon Slayer's shoulder. Natsu yelped, spinning around to face the clone. There you are. The clone offered a lazy smile. You're looking the wrong way. Natsu turned back to the balcony, seeing the original Arashi still standing there. Then looked back at the clone, his brain struggling to catch up. How? The clone poked him in the forehead. Natsu's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the floor in a heap, fast asleep. The clone then dissolved into a puff of smoke, leaving the guild in a momentary, stunned silence before they erupted into laughter. A simple nerve strike, Arashi explained to a wide-eyed Erza. He'll wake up in an hour with a mild headache. Erza stared, half impressed, half exasperated. You put him to sleep. It was more efficient than fighting him. Before she could respond, the guild hall doors swung open with an authoritative crash. A man in the formal, blue and white uniform of the Rune Knights stood silhouetted in the doorway, flanked by two of his soldiers. The laughter in the hall died instantly, replaced by a tense silence. By order of the Magic Council, the Knight Captain announced, his voice ringing with cold authority, Arashi Uzumaki is hereby summoned to Era for a form. Hearing regarding the unauthorized use of unclassified magic and his involvement in the dismantlement of the Iron Vulture Syndicate. Makarov, who had been sitting at the bar, hopped onto the counter, his expression suddenly grim. On what grounds? The boy did Fury a service. The council does not recognize his service, Master Makarov, the captain replied stiffly. They recognize a threat. His presence is required by noon tomorrow. Failure to comply will result in a Class S fugitive warrant. He placed a rolled-up scroll on a nearby table, then turned and departed, his message delivered. The festive atmosphere of the guild had evaporated. Everyone was looking at Arashi, their expressions a mixture of concern and defiance. The stuffy old fools, Makarov muttered, hopping down and picking up the scroll. He looked at Arashi, his aged eyes sharp. This is not a request, my boy. It's a demand. They're afraid of you. Arashi's expression was unreadable. He had expected this. Power de Chi cannot be understood will always be feared. I will go. You will not go alone, Erza said immediately, her voice leaving no room for argument. She was Titania again, her easy demeanor replaced by iron resolve. Master, I will accompany him. Makarov nodded, as is your right as his sponsor. I will come as well. The council may be made of fools, but they are not brave enough to openly defy me. Not yet. Arashi looked at them. The fierce loyalty of the woman who shared his scars, the paternal protectiveness of the master who had known him less than a week. A faint, unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. He had walked into this hall a stranger. Now, facing the judgment of the most powerful governing body on the continent, he was not alone. Thank you, he said, the words simple, but carrying the weight of a lifetime of solitude. The Magic Council's headquarters in Era was an imposing structure of white marble and gold filigree, designed to project an aura of absolute authority and unshakable order. Inside, the grand hall was cold and cavernous, the 9 members of the council seated on high-backed thrones, looking down on the 3 figures standing in the center of the floor. Arashi stood between Makarov and Erza, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, his demeanor one of casual indifference that he knew was infuriating to men who built their lives on ceremony and deference. Arashi Uzumaki, a stern-faced man with a long, gray beard began. It was Org, a man Makarov had described as stuffy but generally fair. You stand before this council to answer for your actions. You are not a registered mage of any guild, yet you wield power sufficient to annihilate a major dark guild. You must understand why we find this concerning. I was performing a job I was contracted for, Arashi replied. His voice echoing slightly in the vast hall. The guild was an obstacle. I removed it. A different councilman, a younger, hawkish man with slicked back black hair named Grandoma, scoffed. You removed it. With a form of magic none of our archives can identify. It is not a caster magic. It is not a holder magic. It bears resemblance to some forms of lost magic, but its application is alien. What is this power, Uzumaki? He said the name as if it were a disease. It is my own, Arashi said simply. Doma's eyes narrowed. An unacceptable answer. We demand to know its nature, its limits, its origin. Power of this magnitude, left unchecked and uncatalogued, is a threat to the stability of the entire kingdom. Makarov stepped forward, his small frame radiating an immense pressure. The boy is now a member of Fairy Tail. His magic is a guild matter. He has broken no laws. In fact, he enforced them where the council's own rune knights failed. His associate, Ion with your chaotic guild is another point of concern, Makarov, Doma shot back, his voice dripping with condescension. We cannot simply accept this anomaly into the fold. We require a demonstration, a proper assessment of his capabilities against a known quantity. A murmur went through the council members. Arashi remained silent, watching the political theater play out. He knew what was coming. They wanted to test him. To measure him. It was the same old story. Doma smiled, a cold, predatory thing. Fortunately, we have a benchmark of unimpeachable power with us today. Jura Nikis, of the 10 Wizard Saints. From an alcove, the bald, powerfully built member of Lamia's scale stepped forward, his hands clasped before him, his expression serene. If the council deems it necessary. Makarov bristled. You would pit him against a Wizard Saint. This is not an assessment, it's an execution. It is a spar, Makarov, Doma said smoothly. A test. Unless, of course, your new recruit is afraid. All eyes turned to Arashi. He met Doma's smug gaze, then looked at Jura. He saw no malice in the Wizard Saint, only duty. He gave a slight shrug. Fine. The spar was held in the council's private training arena. A massive stone coliseum beneath the main hall. Arashi and Jura faced each other in the center, while the council, Makarov, and Erza watched from a protected balcony. Also present a contingent of envoys from other legal guilds, invited by Doma to witness the proceedings. Among them, standing with the members of Mermaid Heel, was a woman with long, dark hair tied in a high ponytail. Her hand resting on the hilt of a sheathed katana. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Kagura Mikazuki. Begin. Doma's voice boomed. Jura bowed his head slightly. I shall not hold back. Show me the nature of your strength. He slammed his hands onto the ground. Iron rock wall. A massive, thick wall of solid rock erupted from the ground, rushing toward Arashi like a tidal wave. It was a display of raw, overwhelming power. Arashi didn't move to counter it. Instead, he vanished. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, appearing atop the charging wall as it surged past his former position. He ran along its crest, his speed a blur. Jura, surprised by the sheer velocity, stomped his foot. Rock spikes of the Mountain King. Dozens of razor-sharp pillars of stone shot up from the wall, trying to impale him. Arashi moved like water, weaving between them without breaking stride. He was halfway to Jura when he pushed off, leaping high into the air. He's fast, Erza breathed, her hands clenched. It's more than speed, Makarov murmured, his eyes narrowed. He's not even winded. In midair, Arashi made 2 quick hand signs. 4 clones popped into existence around Jura, 2 on the ground, 2 in the air. Jura, unflappable, responded instantly. Iron rock fists. 4 massive stone fists erupted from the ground, smashing the 2 ground clones into smoke. He then thrust his hands upward, and pillars of rock shot toward the aerial clones. But it was a feint. The real Arashi was descending directly behind him, his right hand already a spinning vortex of chaotic energy. Rasengan. Jura's senses screamed. He didn't have time to turn. He hardened his entire body with his earth magic, becoming as durable as diamond. Iron body of the saint. The Rasengan slammed into Jura's back. The sound was sickening, a high-pitched shriek of grinding power. Jura's magical defense, one of the strongest in all of Fury, held, but only just. Cracks spider webbed across his back as the rotational force drilled into him. He was driven forward 5 feet, his boots gouging deep trenches in the stone floor. The attack didn't break him, but the sheer, concentrated violence of it staggered him. Before he could recover, Arashi was on him. He landed lightly, his Sage Mode's precognition showing him the minute fluctuations in Jura's magical energy. He didn't try to overpower him again. He struck with his open palm. Not with force, but with precision, tapping Jura's shoulder. A pulse of chakra, invisible to the naked eye, disrupted the flow of magic to Jura's arm. Jura tried to raise his hand for a counterattack, and found it numb and unresponsive. What? Arashi struck again, a two-fingered jab to a point just below Jura's ribs. Another pulse. Jura's stance faltered as the magic in his legs wavered. It was like the gentle fist of the Hyuga, a style Arashi had fought against and learned from countless times. He wasn't damaging the body, he was severing its connection to its power source. Jura, realizing what was happening, let out a roar and unleashed a massive, omnidirectional shockwave of earth magic. Roar of the solid earth. Arashi was already moving, leaping backward out of the blast radius. He landed 30 feet away as Jura sank to one knee, breathing heavily, the feeling slowly returning to his limbs. The wizard saint looked up, his calm expression gone, replaced by one of genuine astonishment. "I yield," Jura said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "I cannot track your movements, and your strikes interfere with my magic. To continue would be foolish." The entire arena was silent. Grand Doma's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. He had expected a public humiliation of the upstart. Instead, he had just witnessed a wizard saint be systematically dismantled and defeated in under a minute. It was in that moment of stunned silence that Kagura's voice rang out, sharp and cold as glacial ice. "You." She vaulted over the balcony railing, landing gracefully in the arena. She drew her blade, the unsheathed sword known as archenemy, and leveled it at Arashi. Her eyes were burning with a cold, pure hatred. "Kagura, what are you doing?" Miliana, her guildmate, cried out from above. Kagura ignored her. Her entire being was focused on Arashi. "I know your kind of power. That unnatural energy. I felt it on Galuna Island. I felt it at the Tower of Heaven. You fight like him." The name was a curse on her lips. "Jelal." Erza gasped. "Kagura. No, he has nothing to do with Jelal. He was there." Kagura's voice rose, cracking with years of suppressed grief. "At the tower. Simon died because of Jelal, because of that place. Were you one of his followers? Another one of his disciples hiding in the shadows?" Arashi's calm expression finally broke, replaced by a deep, profound weariness. He looked at the rage in Kagura's eyes and saw not an enemy, but another victim. A girl drowning in a pain so deep it had become the only thing keeping her afloat. "I was a slave there," Arashi said, his voice quiet but firm. "Just like her." He nodded toward Erza. "Lies." Kagura screamed, her grief and rage blinding her to all reason. She dashed forward, her blade a silver blur. "You will answer for Simon's death." Her swordsmanship was exquisite, a masterclass in precision and power. But Arashi simply moved. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't even raise his fists. He parried her blade with the back of his forearm, the impact ringing like steel on steel. He sidestepped, he swayed, he redirected. He was a leaf in the wind of her fury, untouchable. "Fight me," she shrieked, her frustration mounting with every deflected blow. He wasn't fighting her, he was enduring her. It was a deeper insult than any counterattack. "I will not," Arashi said, his voice laced with a sadness that cut through her rage. He caught her blade between his palms, the razor-sharp edge inches from his face. The strength in his grip was absolute. She couldn't budge it. "Your hatred is a cage. Kagura," he said softly, his blue eyes looking directly into hers. "It won't bring him back. It will only consume you. You know nothing of my pain." She snarled, trying to rip her sword free. "Don't I?" He closed his eyes. And then he did something no one could have predicted. He didn't use a spell. He didn't use an attack. He used a sliver of his sensory abilities. A technique he'd honed over 2 lifetimes, and pushed a single, raw memory into her mind. Kagura's world dissolved. She was no longer in the arena. She was a child again, but not herself. She was a blonde-haired boy, small and underfed, standing before a line of hulking guards. She felt his terror, his desperate, hopeless rage. She saw through his eyes as the guards dragged a younger child away, crying for his parents. She felt his legs move on their own, a reckless, suicidal charge. She felt the crushing blow of a club against her. His back, the sharp agony, the taste of dust and blood. She felt the cold despair of powerlessness, the burning shame of being unable to protect anyone. It was the raw, unfiltered anguish of the Tower of Heaven, seen through his eyes. The vision lasted only a second, but it shattered her. The connection broke. Kagura stumbled back, gasping, her sword slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. The fury in her eyes was gone, replaced by a horrifying, shared understanding. The pain she had carried as her own, her sacred burden, was reflected in him. He knew. He had been there. He had felt the same helplessness. Tears streamed down her face, not of rage, but of a broken, aching grief she had held back for a decade. She fell to her knees, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. The fight was over. There had been no victor. Only two survivors of the same hell. Erza rushed to her side, her own eyes wet with tears. She knelt and put a hand on Kagura's shoulder, a gesture of shared sorrow. Arashi stood over them, his expression one of deep melancholy. He had not wanted to do that, to force his own pain upon her. But it was the only way to make her see past her vengeance. He turned and walked away, leaving the two women to their grief. His victory in the arena feeling as hollow and bitter as ash. In a darkened room far from Erza, lit only by the flickering glow of a communication lacrima, Ultear Milkovich watched the proceedings with a hawk's intensity. Jelil and Merity were out on a mission, leaving her to manage their intelligence network. She had hacked into a low-level council visual feed, a risky but necessary move. She had seen it all. The effortless defeat of Jura. The raw, emotional confrontation with Kagura. The way he had shared his pain instead of his power. It was him. It was the boy who had given her the wooden bird, but grown into a man of terrifying capability and even more terrifying compassion. Her hands trembled as she worked at a separate console. The council was in disarray. This Grand Doma was dangerous. A zealot for order who would see Arashi as a cancer to be cut out. He would not let this defeat stand. He would rally others. He would form secret committees, Black Ops units. She knew how these men thought. With nimble fingers, she compiled a dossier. Doma's political allies, his financial backers, the names of the hardliners on the council, whispers of a new, special monitoring task force, being proposed. It was sensitive, dangerous information. She encrypted it, routing it through a dozen dead-end servers before sending it to a secure drop point she had established years ago, a hollowed-out book in a small, dusty library in Magnolia. She attached a simple, unsigned note. They fear you. This is who you should watch. It was a reckless act. If traced back to her, it would compromise all of Crime Sorcier. But she didn't hesitate. He had offered her a hand in the dark once before. He had looked at her not as a monster, but as a person. This was the only way she knew how to repay that kindness. To be a part of his world without tainting it with her presence. It was an act of loyalty. An act of penance. An act of love. Miles away, in the rain-soaked, ruined fortress of the Iron Vultures. Another figure moved through the wreckage. He wore the simple, gray robes of an ascetic, his face shadowed by a deep cowl. This was Inquisitor Valerius of the Silentium Dei. He was not a warrior. He was a scholar of the profane. An archaeologist of blasphemy. He ignored the bodies and the destruction. He was following a scent, an energy signature that was utterly alien to this world. It was faint, but to his divinely attuned senses, it screamed like a discordant choir. He found the spot where Arashi had faced Grawl. He knelt, his fingers brushing over the spiraling pattern of cracks left by the Rasengan. He closed his eyes, concentrating. Not of Ethernano, he whispered, his voice dry as rustling leaves. It is drawn from the self. A font of personal energy, mingled with the leaf. Of the world itself, but a world not our own. He produced a small, obsidian shard from his robes. He pressed it against the stone. The shard glowed with a faint, sickly purple light, absorbing the residual energy. A soul from beyond the great cycle, he murmured, a cold, fanatical smile gracing his lips. The anomaly is confirmed. An invasive reality. A seed of chaos planted in our Lord's garden. He rose, tucking the now glowing shard away. The first report had been a whisper. Now, he had proof. Physical, undeniable evidence of otherworldly corruption. The report must be elevated. The hand must be summoned. He declared to the empty, ruined hall. He had a name, pulled from the council's chatter, Arashi Uzumaki. Of fairy tale, the hunt now had a name. And a location. The journey back to Magnolia was somber. The council, backed into a corner by Arashi's public display and Jura's concession, had been forced to ratify his membership. Grand Doma had looked as if he'd swallowed poison, but he had stamped the document. A victory, but it felt like anything but. Kagura had not spoken another word. She had simply allowed Erza and Miliana to lead her away, her eyes vacant, her certainty shattered. When they returned to the guild hall, the news of their success, and the dramatic details, which had already arrived via rumor, was met with a massive cheer. Makarov stood on the bar, holding up the official document. "He is one of us," the master declared, and the hall erupted. Makarov took out the guild's stamp. "Where would you like it, my boy?" Arashi looked around at the cheering, grinning faces. He thought of the cold marble of Erza, of Kagura's tear-streaked face, of the dying zealot's prophecy. This place, this loud, chaotic, fiercely loyal family, was now his. And his enemies were now theirs. He pushed up the sleeve of his right arm. "On my shoulder," he said. Makarov grinned and pressed the stamp firmly onto his skin. A glowing, orange fairy tale mark appeared, the same color as his sage mode markings. It felt warm, like a brand of belonging. He was home. Later that night, long after the celebrations had died down, Arashi stood on the same balcony, looking out at the moonlit town. The guild mark on his shoulder felt strange, a physical symbol of a bond he was still hesitant to fully accept. Erza found him there again. She didn't speak, just handed him a small, wrapped package. He opened it. It was a book, a history of lost magic. "I found it in the library," she said. "It's a secure drop for an information broker I know." The package was addressed to the Golden Storm. Arashi's eyes widened slightly. He opened the book. Tucked inside were several folded sheets of paper, covered in meticulous, handwritten notes. It was Ultear's dossier. He scanned the names, the connections, the mention of the Special Monitoring Task Force. It was a complete political map of his new enemies within the council. "An information broker?" he asked, his voice neutral. "She's complicated," Erza admitted. "But she's on our side." He tucked the papers away, his mind racing. Ultear. She was watching over him, protecting him from the shadows. Another thread in the impossibly tangled knot his life had become. He looked from the damning intelligence in his hand to the guild mark on his arm. He had a family. He had allies in the dark. But he also had a government task force assigned to watch his every move. And a fanatical death cult that believed he was a cosmic disease. From a rooftop across the town, Kagura Mikazuki sat with her sword laid across her lap, staring at the fairy tale guild hall. Her mind was a torrent of confusion, grief, and a strange, new feeling of respect for the man who had defeated her without striking a single blow. Her path of vengeance had led to a dead end. She didn't know where to go from here. Arashi felt her gaze, a faint pinprick in his senses. He didn't look in her direction. He just stared out at the night, the weight of his new bonds and new enemies settling on his shoulders. The eye of the storm had passed. Now, the real tempest was about to begin. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sage on the Grand Stage. The city of Crocus was a dazzling jewel. A riot of celebration and competition. Banners of every color streamed from arched bridges, the streets were packed with cheering crowds, and the air crackled with excitement. At the center of it all, like a great stone heart, stood the Domus Flow, the arena for the Grand Magic Games. For Fairy Tale, this was more than a competition. It was a chance to reclaim their honor. To rise from the ashes of their 7-year absence and prove they were still the strongest guild in Fury. For Arashi Uzumaki, it was an irksome but necessary spectacle. He stood with the chosen team, Natsu, Gray, Erza, and Lucy, in the waiting tunnel, the roar of the crowd a deafening wave of sound. Natsu was practically vibrating with excitement, Gray was stoically trying to ignore him, Lucy was a bundle of nerves. And Erza was a pillar of calm focus. Arashi, by contrast, was an oasis of tranquility. He had fought in wars, faced down beasts that could shatter mountains. A gladiatorial tournament, no matter how grand, felt quaint. "Are you nervous?" Erza asked, her voice low. She had noticed his unnerving stillness. "No," Arashi replied honestly. "Just observant." His sage mode was active, but subtly. He wasn't drawing in enough natural energy to manifest the pigmentation around his eyes, but enough to expand his senses exponentially. He could feel the thrumming life force of every person in the stadium. The unique magical signatures of every competitor from every guild. He was mapping the entire battlefield before the first bell had even rung. He sorted and catalogued the powers of Sabertooth's strongest, the arrogant pride of the blonde one, Sting, the quiet shadow of the dark-haired one, Rogue, the cruel, predatory energy of the woman named Minerva. He felt Kagura's presence, a tempest of controlled gravity and inner turmoil. He felt Jura's solid, earthy power. He was also spreading his senses further, across the entire city. It was a precaution. The information from Ultear had made him wary. Doma and the council were watching. And somewhere, in the shadows, the Silentium Dei were waiting. He could feel no overt threats, but a faint, cold static on the edge of his perception kept him on edge. And now, the guild that was once Fiore's strongest, but has fallen on hard times. Will this be the year they reclaim their glory? Give it up for Fairy Tail. The announcer's voice boomed. A wave of polite, almost pitying applause washed over them as they walked into the light. Arashi noted the smirks from the other guilds, the outright laughter from the Sabertooth contingent. They were seen as a joke. Good. Let them underestimate him. The first day's event was a race called Hidden. Arashi was not chosen. He watched Gray struggle through the illusionary maze, his analytical mind dissecting the mechanics of the game. It was a test of perception and quick thinking, not just raw power. Fairy Tail ended the day in last place. The mood in their designated inn was somber. Last place. Again. Natsu fumed, kicking a table. It is only the first day, Erza said, though her own frustration was evident. We will recover. Arashi, who had been quietly meditating in a corner, spoke without opening his eyes. Their strategies are sound. Sabertooth is using teamwork and precise power application. Raven Tail is cheating, using illusions to sabotage the other competitors. Mermaid Heel relies on the overwhelming power of its two strongest members. We are fighting with brute force and spirit. It's not enough. They all stared at him. What do you mean? Lucy asked. I mean, Arashi said, opening his eyes, that we need to be smarter. He made a hand sign, and 5 clones popped into existence in the room, each one a perfect, solid replica. The team, aside from Erza, jumped. Tomorrow, Arashi stated, while one of us competes, the rest of us will not just be watching. We will be training, and I will be gathering information. He gestured to the clones. My duplicates can go anywhere, see anything. By the time my turn comes, I will know the strengths, weaknesses, and psychological triggers of every major competitor in this arena. Makarov, who had been listening from the doorway, stroked his chin. A slow, wide grin spread across his face. Deception, information warfare, and overwhelming power. My boy, you are a true fairy tale mage after all. The second day's event was called Chariot, a brutal race atop a convoy of moving wagons. Natsu, despite his crippling motion sickness, insisted on participating. It was a disaster. Arashi watched, his expression unreadable, as Natsu collapsed. He understood the boy's desire to prove himself, but it was strategically idiotic. While the guild despaired, Arashi sent his clones out. They slipped through crocus like ghosts, listening to conversations, observing the other guild's training sessions, mapping the city's layout. One clone even managed to tail the members of Raven Tail, confirming his suspicions. They weren't just sabotaging, they were using forbidden markers to drain their opponents' magic reserves. On the third day, the event was pandemonium. A castle filled with 100 monsters of increasing difficulty. The challenger chose how many they wished to fight. Erza stepped forward, intending to challenge all 100. It was her moment, the return of Titania. But Arashi placed a hand on her shoulder. No, he said quietly. Let me. Erza looked at him, surprised. Arashi, this is my. I know, he interrupted gently. But winning this event isn't about proving your strength. It's about sending a message to everyone who doubts us. It's about crushing their morale so completely that they never look at our guild mark with pity again. His blue eyes were cold and hard as diamonds. Let me do this. Erza saw the unshakable resolve in his face. It was not a request for glory. It was a calculated, strategic decision. She nodded slowly. All right. Arashi stepped into the arena. The crowd murmured, confused. They had expected Titania, Who was this unknown? And from Fairy Tail, a surprise challenger, Arashi Uzumaki. The announcer yelled, "How many monsters will he challenge?" Arashi looked up at the floating castle of Pandemonium. He raised his hand. "I challenge all 100. A wave of shock, then laughter, rippled through the stadium. Even the saber-tooth mages were chuckling. "He's copying Erza-san." One of them jeered. Only a few people weren't laughing. Makarov was grinning from ear to ear. Erza watched with tense anticipation. And in the mermaid heel stands, Kagura leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. Sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen, Arashi was teleported into the castle. He stood in a vast, circular chamber. One by one, the monsters began to appear. D-class goblins, C-class Vulcans, B-class gargoyles. They filled the chamber, a screeching, roaring horde. Arashi closed his eyes. He drew a deep breath, and this time, he did not hold back. The natural energy of the world flooded into him, a torrential tidal wave of power. The orange pigmentation exploded around his eyes, stark and vibrant. He opened them, his pupils now the horizontal bars of a toad sage. From the lacrima screens in the stadium, the audience saw the change. "What's happening to his eyes?" someone screamed. Arashi didn't speak. He simply raised his hand. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a deafening cascade of smoke, the chamber was filled. Not with 100 clones. Not with 200, but with 1,000. An army of Arashis, each one solid, each one radiating power, each one wearing the same serene, predatory expression. The stadium was utterly, completely silent. Jaws were hanging open, eyes were wide with disbelief. What is this magic? Doma snarled from the council's box. Gripping the railing, the Arashi in the center of the army simply said, "Go." The clones surged forward. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. Rasengans flared to life by the dozen. Miniature typhoons of destruction that tore through the higher-level S-class monsters. Clones wielding blades of pure wind decapitated lesser beasts. Others used taijutsu, dismantling the monsters with brutal, efficient strikes. The chamber became a whirlwind of orange, black, and smoke. The roar of the monsters was replaced by the sound of utter annihilation. It was over in 90 seconds. The last monster, a towering behemoth that was said to be SS class, was all that remained. Before it could even roar, the original Arashi appeared on its head. He held a single, three-pronged kunai in his hand. He tossed it into the air. Hiraishin. He vanished. Then he reappeared, his hand on the back of the monster's neck, just as the kunai fell past its head. A massive Rasengan, far larger than any he had used before, was slammed into the monster's spine. The beast didn't even cry out. It simply imploded, the rotational energy reducing it to dust. Arashi landed on the now empty floor, not a scratch on him. He dispelled the remaining clones and looked up at the lacrima camera, his sage eyes seeming to stare into the soul of every person watching. Fairy Tail had just scored a perfect first place. The silence in the Domus Flow was broken by a single, thunderous roar from the Fairy Tail stands. The rest of the stadium slowly, hesitantly, began to applaud, a sound of awe and terror. Sabertooth's mages were no longer smiling. Their leader, Giemma, looked ready to murder someone. Arashi had not just won the event. He had declared war. The battles of the fourth day were overshadowed by Arashi's display. The final match was Erza versus Kagura versus Minerva of Sabertooth. Arashi watched from the stands, his arms crossed. He had warned Erza about Minerva's territorial magic, a strand. GE power over space he had analyzed with his sage mode. The fight was a spectacular display of power and skill. Erza and Kagura, two of the finest swordswomen on the continent, clashed with breathtaking force. But as the fight wore on, Minerva's cruel nature came to the forefront. After Erza and Kagura had exhausted each other, Minerva stepped in, trapping a nearly unconscious Kagura in a bubble of distorted space. Then, she began to torture her, her laughter echoing through the arena. "That's enough," Erza screamed, trying to get to her feet. In the stands, Arashi's eyes narrowed. He saw Kagura's pain, her humiliation. He saw Miliana crying out for her. He remembered the broken girl in the council arena. And he remembered the dying zealot's words, and all who were stained by it. Kagura was now associated with him. An enemy's target. His responsibility. He disappeared. Not even Makarov saw him move. One moment he was in the stands, the next he was on the arena floor. He didn't appear, with a flash of light or a burst of speed. He was just there. Minerva was so engrossed in her sadism that she didn't notice him until he was right behind her. "You talk too much," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She spun around, her eyes wide with shock. "You." She tried to trap him in her territory, but it was like trying to catch smoke. He flowed around the spatial distortion, his hand grabbing her wrist. There was no brute force. He simply applied pressure to a specific nerve cluster. Minerva gasped, her entire arm going numb, her magic sputtering and dying. He twisted her arm behind her back, neutralizing her as effortlessly as he had Natsu. "The match is over," he announced to the silent stadium. He released Minerva, who stumbled back, clutching her arm, her face a mask of fury and fear. He then walked over to where Kagura lay. He knelt, gathering her gently into his arms. She was barely conscious, her body bruised and battered. "You're safe," he whispered. He stood up, carrying her as if she weighed nothing, and began walking towards the Mermaid Heel infirmary tunnel. He didn't look at the judges, the audience, or the sputtering announcer. His message was clear. The rules of the game no longer applied. He passed Erza on the way. She looked at him, then at the defeated Minerva, then at Kagura in his arms. There was no jealousy in her eyes, only a deep, profound understanding and respect. He was protecting one of their own, a kindred spirit from the tower. It was what a fairy tale mage would do. He carried Kagura into the infirmary, laying her on a cot. Miliana and the rest of her guild rushed in, surrounding her. Kagura's eyes fluttered open, her gaze finding Arashi. "Why?" she croaked, her voice hoarse. "Because no one deserves that," he said simply. "Rest." He turned to leave, but her hand shot out, weakly grabbing his sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, something that had finally broken through the wall of her vengeance. He gave a slight nod and gently pulled his sleeve free, leaving her with her guildmates. The grand magic games were thrown into chaos, but Arashi didn't care. A line had been crossed, and he had redrawn it in steel. The final day, the Eclipse Gate, the coming of the dragons. The city of Crocus became a war zone. The J.O.U.'s festival turned into a nightmare of fire and destruction. The guilds, once rivals, now fought side by side against the 7 dragons that had emerged from the gate. Arashi was in his element. This was not a game. This was war. He moved through the city like a golden blur, his sage mode giving him complete battlefield awareness. He saved entire platoons of rune knights with perfectly timed interventions. His Rasen shurikens, massive, shrieking discs of wind chakra, slicing through dragon scales that were impervious to normal magic. He used his clones as a citywide evacuation and rescue team, pulling civilians from collapsing buildings. He saw Natsu and the other dragon slayers fighting with everything they had. He saw Erza, her body battered but her spirit unbroken, leading the charge against the smaller dragon hatchlings. He saw Kagura, recovered enough to fight, her blade now defending the city she had come to compete in. And he felt a familiar, terrible presence. Ultear. His senses guided him to a quiet plaza, away from the worst of the fighting. He found her there, kneeling on the ground. She was old, her skin was wrinkled, her hair white and brittle. She looked ancient, her life force a guttering candle flame. She had cast last ages. A single minute, rewound across the entire world, at the cost of her own timeline. A minute that had saved countless lives, his own included. He had been about to be incinerated by a dragon's breath when the world had shimmered, and he had found himself a few feet to the left, the attack missing him completely. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a peaceful, weary acceptance. "Arashi," she rasped, her voice the rustle of dry leaves. "I'm glad. I got to see you one last time." "You idiot," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He knelt in front of her, his hands glowing with a soft, green energy. Medical ninjutsu. But it wasn't enough. Her very essence was unraveling. "It's all right," she whispered. "I've done so much wrong. This is a fitting price. My sin is atoned for. To hell with your atonement." He growled, a flash of the old, defiant Naruto breaking through his calm exterior. He placed his hand on her chest. He closed his eyes and reached deep inside himself, to the very core of his soul, where the last vestiges of another, far greater power still lingered. A faint, fiery red chakra, warm and impossibly vital. Kurama's gift, a parting legacy from his oldest friend. He poured it into her. Ultear gasped as a wave of unimaginable warmth and vitality flooded her being. It was not arc of time. It was the opposite. It was a torrent of pure, unadulterated life force. The wrinkles on her skin began to recede. Her hair slowly regained its dark luster. Her body, which had been withering away, began to mend. It came at a cost. Arashi grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. He felt a profound drain, a hollowing out sensation as he gave a piece of his own life, and Kurama's, to her. He pulled his hand back, breathing heavily. Ultear was no longer an old woman. She was herself again, though pale and weak. She stared at her hands, then at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and awe. What did you do? She stammered. I gave you a future, he said, his voice strained. He swayed, the exertion hitting him all at once. Don't waste it by dying for a past you can't change. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were not of guilt or sorrow. They were of a hope so overwhelming it was painful. He hadn't just saved her. He had validated her. He had refused to let her sacrifice be her end. He pushed himself to his feet, his job not yet done. The fight's not over, he said, turning back toward the chaos. Arashi, wait, she called out, her voice stronger now. He stopped. She struggled for the words. My life is yours. Wherever you go, I will follow. It was not a declaration of servitude. It was a pledge of absolute devotion. He didn't answer. He just gave a small nod and vanished back into the fray. The dragons were eventually defeated, thanks to the combined efforts of the dragon slayers and the destruction of the Eclipse Gate. The city was in ruins, but it was saved. As dawn broke, casting a golden light over the ravaged capital, Arashi stood on the rooftop of a half-collapsed building, looking over the scene of devastation and survival. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. Footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn. He felt their auras. Erza, her armor dented and cracked, but her spirit bright. Kagura, her movement stiff from her injuries. But her presence cleared of the dark cloud of vengeance that had always surrounded it. And Ultear, cloaked and hesitant, but there. The three women came to stand beside him, a silent trinity of scarlet, crimson, and midnight. They didn't speak. They just stood with him, watching the sunrise. Erza moved first. She simply reached out and took his hand. It was a simple, grounding gesture. A statement of solidarity. I am with you. Kagura, after a moment's hesitation, did the same, taking his other hand. Her grip was firm, a warrior's promise. I owe you my life, and my future. Ultear stood slightly behind him, as if she still felt unworthy. Arashi, without looking, reached a hand back. An invitation. Hesitantly, she took it. Her hand was trembling, but it was warm. You gave me a life worth living. The bonds between them, forged in the fires of the tower, tested in the arena, and now solidified in the crucible of war, were no longer unspoken. They were a tangible thing. A current of shared strength and emotion that flowed between the four of them. Arashi looked at the three women whose lives were now inextricably tangled with his own. He, who had spent a time chasing acknowledgement and a second lifetime embracing solitude, was now the center of this strange, powerful constellation. But as he looked out at the cheering crowds beginning to gather in the streets below, his sage mode picked it up again. The cold static. This time, it was closer. Sharper. It was a predatory presence, hidden amongst the survivors, observing him. It felt ancient, patient, and utterly devoid of mercy. It felt like judgment. The games were over. The war against the dragons was won. But Arashi knew, with chilling certainty, that his own war was just beginning. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Vow Forged in Shadow. The month following the Grand Magic Games and the Dragon Invasion was one of reconstruction, both for the city of Crocus and for the souls of its defenders. Fairy Tail, their reputation restored and then some, returned to Magnolia as heroes. Arashi, however, found no peace in the celebration. The cold, predatory presence he'd sensed in Crocus had vanished after the battle. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a constant, low-level hum at the edge of his senses. He was a target, and by extension, so was his new home. He didn't return to the guild hall. Instead, with a substantial portion of his accumulated earnings, he purchased a tract of land on a wooded hill overlooking Magnolia. It was remote enough for privacy, yet close enough to the guild if they were needed. There, with the help of a small army of shadow clones, he began to construct a home. Not a house, but a home. Large, sturdy, with the simple, functional aesthetic of his past life. Built from the timber of the surrounding forest. He wasn't alone in this endeavor. Erza was there every day after her own guild duties were done. She didn't offer suggestions on design or structure, she simply worked. She hauled lumber that would make other mages strain, she hammered nails with a warrior's precision, and she shared his silent lunches, the two of them sitting on a half-finished roof. Looking out at the valley below, her presence was a comforting, grounding weight, a silent affirmation that she intended to build a life here with him. Kagura arrived on the third day. She appeared at the edge of the clearing, her hand not on her sword, which was now a simple blade she wore for utility rather than vengeance, but holding a basket of fruit. She had formally taken a leave of absence from Mermaid Heel, telling her guildmates she needed to find a new path. That path, it seemed, had led her here. She was quieter than Erza, more reserved, but she found her own rhythm. She cleared the surrounding land, her precise control over gravity making the uprooting of stones and stumps a strangely graceful affair. She established a garden, her movements deliberate and focused, as if she were learning to nurture life after spending so long preparing to take it. Ultear was the last to arrive, a ghost at the edge of the treeline. Arashi had found her a small, secluded cottage on the far side of the town. A place to recover and stay hidden while crime sorcière regrouped. But she was drawn to the hill. She would watch from a distance for hours, a silent sentinel torn between her desire to be with him and her fear of tainting his new life. It was Arashi who finally walked down to the woods and extended a hand. "There's work to be done," he'd said simply. She began organizing the logistics, procuring supplies from the town with a discreet efficiency that spoke of her years in the shadows. She managed the project, her sharp mind for strategy now turned to creating a sanctuary. They were a strange, unspoken family, 4 disparate souls, each scarred in their own way, building something together. The townsfolk of Magnolia whispered, wondering about the powerful blonde mage and his 3 constant, beautiful companions. The guild members of Fairy Tale just grinned and made bets. One evening, as the frame of the main house stood stark against the twilight sky, the 4 of them sat around a crackling campfire, sharing a simple meal. The silence was comfortable, filled not with tension, but with the quiet hum of shared purpose. Arashi broke it. "We need to talk." The 3 women looked at him. "The council has backed off, but they haven't forgotten," he began, his gaze serious. "Grand Doma's faction is still active. The Special Monitoring Task Force is real, though they're keeping their distance for now." He looked at Ultear. "Your information was invaluable." Ultear flinched slightly at the direct acknowledgement, but a faint blush touched her cheeks. "But that's not the real threat," Arashi continued, his voice lowering. "In the fortress, I found a zealot. He spoke of a god named Anksarum, and an order called the Silentium Dei, the Silence of God. They believe I'm an anomaly, a blasphemy against the natural order of this world. They knew I was a reincarnated soul." A chill went through the group. Erza's hand instinctively went to the hilt of a sword leaning against a nearby log. Kagura's expression hardened. "This zealot's last words were a threat," Arashi said, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "He said they would purge my taint, and all who are stained by it. By being with me, by building this life with me, you have become targets." He let the weight of his words settle. "I will not ask you to leave. But you need to know the danger. If you stay, you are declaring war on a cult of religious fanatics who serve the god of death. I need to know that you are all in, no reservations." Erza was the first to speak, her voice as solid and unyielding as her armor. "When I was a child in that tower, I was alone and afraid. When I escaped, I built armor around my heart and told myself I needed no one. I was wrong." She looked at him, her brown eyes blazing with fierce emotion. You are a part of my past that I never thought I would get back. You are my present. My place is by your side. If they want to get to you, they will have to go through me. This is not a choice, Arashi. It is a fact. Kagura was next. She placed her palms on her knees, her gaze steady and clear. The storm of vengeance that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a calm, deep resolve. For 10 years, my life had only one purpose, to kill Jelil. It was a dark, empty path that led nowhere. You showed me that. Then you saved me from my own weakness in the arena. You did not have to, but you did. She took a deep breath. My sword, my life, my very being were once pledged to revenge. Now, I pledge them to you. To our family. Protecting this, she gestured to the unfinished house. To the 3 people with her, is a purpose worth living and dying for. I am in. All eyes turned to Ultear. She was trembling, her gaze fixed on the fire. She looked fragile, but her voice, when she spoke, was surprisingly strong. All my life, I have been searching for something. A mother's love, power, atonement. I manipulated, I destroyed, I sinned, all in the name of finding a happiness I thought I deserved. She looked up, and tears were silently tracing paths down her cheeks. And then I tried to throw my life away, and you refused to let me. You gave me a future I had not earned. She met Arashi's gaze, her own eyes filled with a raw, desperate love. Being here, with you, with Erza and Kagura, it's the only time I have ever felt clean. It's the only happiness that has ever felt real. If the price for that happiness is fighting a god and his fanatics, then I will pay it gladly. You are the one thing that makes me want to live, Arashi. I love you. I am not just in. I am yours. The raw, honest confession hung in the air. Erza and Kagura both looked at Ultear, not with jealousy, but with a startling empathy. They all felt it, in their own way. Ashi felt his carefully constructed emotional walls crumble. He had spent his first life chasing recognition, and his second running from connection. Now, these 3 incredible, powerful women were offering him everything. Knowing it could cost them their lives. His heart, a vessel he had thought scarred and half empty, felt impossibly full. He reached out, his hand covering Erza's. He looked at Kagura, then at Ultear. In my old world, he said, his voice thick with emotion, my clan was known for its immense life force, its vast reserves of chakra. They used to say our hearts were the same. Vast enough to hold all the love we were given, and to give it back, tenfold. He took a deep breath, his decision made. I love you, Erza. For your strength, and for the scars we share. I love you, Kagura. For the peace you have found, and the loyalty you offer. And I love you, Ultear. For the goodness you are fighting to reclaim, and for the hope you represent. He looked at all of them, his blue eyes shining in the firelight. I don't know what the laws of this world say about love or marriage. But I know that my heart is big enough for all of you. If you will have me, I want to spend this life with all of you. As a family, as my wives. The word hung in the air, bold and shocking and yet, utterly natural. Erza's breath hitched. Kagura's stoic facade broke into a rare, beautiful smile. Ultear let out a sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. No ceremony was needed, no priest, no document. Here, under the stars, in front of the home they were building with their own hands, they made a vow. A covenant of the heart. The tender moment was shattered by a piercing scream from the direction of Magnolia. Arashi was on his feet in an instant, his sage mode flaring to life. What was that? His senses exploded. He felt it. A wave of death and cold, fanaticism washing over the town. But it wasn't centered on Magnolia. It was further north. He focused, pushing his senses to their limit. Mermaid heel, Kagura whispered. Her face draining of color. She could feel it too, a disturbance in the connection to her own guild. Arashi's eyes widened in horror. It's an attack. On your guild hall. They weren't attacking him directly. They were attacking what he valued, who he was connected to. They were making a statement. They were drawing him out. They're targeting you, Kagura, Arashi said, his voice grim. Without another word, he vanished. A split second later, the sonic boom of his movement echoed through the trees. Let's go, Erza commanded, re-equipping into her flight armor. She grabbed Ultear, whose magic wasn't suited for high-speed travel, and shot into the sky. Kagura followed, using her gravity magic to propel herself through the air at incredible speeds. They were no longer just 4 individuals. They were a single, unified force, moving with one purpose: to protect their own. The port town of Harjan was under siege. The normally bustling harbor was eerily silent. The streets wreathed in a strange, gray mist that seemed to dampen sound and magic alike. The Mermaid Heel Guild Hall, a beautiful structure overlooking the sea, was a battlefield. But this was no ordinary battle. The attackers were not a dark guild. They were silent, robed figures, moving with a chilling, coordinated grace. The purifiers of the Silentium Dei. Their magic was insidious. The Y threw down discs that pulsed with anti-magic energy, creating dead zones where the Mermaid Heel mages found their powers sputtering and dying. They fought not with flashy spells, but with cold steel. Blessed blades that seemed to burn on contact, and a terrifying, dispassionate efficiency. Miliana and the other mages fought desperately, but they were being systematically hurted and cut down. Their leader, a tall, gaunt man with a face like a porcelain mask, stood on a nearby rooftop, observing the cleansing. This was Praetor Cassian's second in command, the one known only as the Lector. The Anomaly's associate is not here. One of the purifiers reported via telepathy. She has been away for weeks. It does not matter, the Lector's mental voice replied, cold and serene. We will purify this nest of heretics. He will come. The scent of their fear will draw him like a moth to a divine flame. As if summoned by his words, a golden streak shot across the sky, moving faster than anything he had ever seen. It slammed into the center of the town square with the force of a meteor, cracking the flagstones and sending a shockwave of wind that momentarily dispersed the magical mist. Arashi stood in the crater, his eyes blazing with the orange of sage mode. He took in the scene in an instant. The wounded mermaids, the anti-magic seals, the dead-eyed fanatics in gray robes. So, you're the dogs of this Anksarum, he said, his voice dangerously low. The Lector's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile from his perch. The anomaly appears. You have taken the bait. Your attachments have made you predictable. You made a mistake, Arashi snarled. You targeted my family. He made a hand sign. 1,000 shadow clones erupted into existence, flooding the streets of Harjan. Get the wounded out, his voice commanded, echoing from 1,000 throats. Engage the enemy. Protect everyone. The battle turned instantly. The clones, unaffected by the anti-magic seals as chakra was not Ethernano, slammed into the purifiers. While they couldn't use ninjutsu within the dead zones, their taijutsu was more than a match for the fanatics. The Mermaid Heel mages, suddenly finding themselves with a veritable army protecting them, were able to regroup and pull their injured to safety. Arashi himself moved towards the Lector. He was a blur of motion, but the purifiers were prepared. 5 of them appeared, wielding long, chain-linked sickles. They threw them, creating a complex web of chains that filled the alleyway he was running through. But Arashi didn't stop. He ran straight up the wall, the chains missing him by inches. As he reached the rooftop, the Lector met him. The man didn't use a weapon. He simply held up a hand, and a wave of pure, negative energy washed over Arashi. It felt like ice water being poured on his soul. His sage mode flickered, the natural energy recoiling from the foul presence. This was not magic. It was something else. A power of decay, of divine negation. Your power is an affront, the Lector said, his voice monotone. It will be silenced. He lunged forward, his fingers outstretched like claws. Arashi met him, not with ninjutsu, but with the raw, brutal taijutsu of a seasoned warrior. Their blows were blurs, each one carrying enough force to shatter stone. But every time Arashi landed a hit, that same cold energy would wash over him, disrupting his chakra flow. Just as the Lector prepared for another strike, a blur of scarlet armor slammed into him from the side. Erza, Heaven's Wheel, she roared, dozens of swords appearing around her, shooting towards the fanatic leader. The Lector clicked his tongue in annoyance, leaping back to avoid the volley. As he landed, the ground beneath him buckled. Kagura stood there, her hand outstretched, gravity bending around her. The Lector was suddenly 10 times heavier, his movements sluggish. From a rooftop above, Ultear's hands glowed. Arc of time, she incanted, her magic not targeting the enemy. But the anti-magic seals scattered across the town. One by one, the gray discs began to corrode, aging centuries in a matter of seconds, crumbling into dust. Magic flooded back into the streets of Harjan. Arashi, Erza, Kagura, and Ultear. They stood together, a united front, their combined presence a stark contrast to the cold nothingness of the purifiers. The lector sneered, his consorts, stained by his blasphemy. You will all be purged. He clapped his hands together, and the remaining purifiers disengaged from the clones surrounding their leader. They began to chant in a low, guttural language. A dark, oppressive energy began to gather around them, a vortex of shadow and negative power. You cannot comprehend what you face, the lector proclaimed, his voice rising. We are the will of the god of death. We will erase your existence. The anti-magic properties were intensifying, pushing back not just against Ethernano, but against Arashi's chakra itself. He could feel it being suppressed, smothered. His clones were beginning to flicker and destabilize. We can't break through that, Erza grunted, her swords unable to penetrate the dark shield. My gravity is being warped, Kagura added, struggling to maintain her hold. Arashi looked at them, at the women who had pledged their lives to him. He saw the determination in their eyes. He would not fail them. Not again. He closed his eyes and reached deeper than he ever had before in this life. He reached for the core of his being, for the roaring, apocalyptic power that he had kept sealed away. He reached for Kurama. A wave of vermilion chakra exploded from him, raw and untamed. It was a torrent of pure, primal energy, tinged with rage and immense power. The oppressive, negative shield of the purifiers didn't just break, it was incinerated. Arashi's appearance changed. His whisker marks thickened, his teeth elongated, and a bubbling shroud of red chakra, shaped like a fox with a single, lashing tail, formed around him. His voice, when he spoke, was a layered snarl, his own mixed with the deep, rumbling bass of the nine tails. You wanted to see my power. He growled, the pressure of his presence making the very air tremble. Then have a taste. He raised a clawed hand, and a sphere of dense, violet-black chakra formed in front of him. A miniature-tailed beast bomb. The sheer, condensed power radiating from it made even Erza and Kagura take a step back. The lector's cold composure finally broke. He stared at the bubbling shroud, at the demonic fox-like visage, at the sphere of absolute destruction. This wasn't an anomaly. This was a demon god. What are you? He breathed, a sliver of genuine fear in his voice. Arashi didn't answer. He thrust his hand forward. But he didn't fire the bomb. At the last second, he dispersed it. The backlash threw him back a step, the red chakra receding slightly. He was breathing heavily, reasserting his control. He could have wiped Harjan off the map. He could have become the monster they claimed he was. But he wasn't. That moment of hesitation was all the lector needed. He made a hand signal, and the purifiers, including their leader, dissolved into shadows, a panicked, disorderly retreat. They had been routed. The red chakra faded completely, leaving Arashi standing there, panting, the immense strain of even a partial transformation taking its toll. Erza was at his side in an instant, her hand on his arm. Kagura and Ultear flanked him, their stances protective. The clones had finished their work. The remaining purifiers had been dispatched, and the mermaid heel mages were safe, tending to their wounded. Miliana ran up to them, her cat-like face streaked with tears and dirt. Kagura-chan, you came, she cried, hugging her friend. She then looked at Arashi, Erza, and Ultear with awe. You saved us. From the shadows of a ruined building, the lector watched them, his heart hammering in his chest. He had failed. He had not only failed to purge the heretics, but he had uncovered a truth far more terrifying than he could have imagined. The anomaly wasn't just a foreign soul. It was a vessel, a cage for a power that rivaled the gods themselves. He clutched a communication lacrima, his hand shaking. He had to deliver his report. But before he could, a final, chilling message, spoken in his own mind, echoed from the battlefield. It was Arashi, using a sensory technique to speak directly to him. This was your only warning. Come near my family again, and I will unwrite you. The lector fled into the night, the threat burning in his mind. This was no longer a simple cleansing. This required a higher authority. Back in the square, Arashi finally straightened up, his breathing evening out. He looked at the three women standing with him, a fierce, protective shield. He saw the awe, the concern, but most importantly, the unwavering trust in their eyes. They had seen the demon inside him, and they hadn't flinched. "Let's go home," he said, his voice quiet but firm. They returned to the hill overlooking Magnolia as the sun began to rise. The house stood half-finished, a promise of a future that had just been violently threatened. They were exhausted, emotionally and physically drained, but they were together. And they were victorious. They stood there, in the first light of dawn, looking at the framework of their home. The vow they had made by the campfire had been sealed in battle. They were a family, forged in shadow and fire. But as he looked out at the peaceful valley, Arashi knew this was only the beginning. The lector had escaped. He would report back, and he would leave one critical detail out of his message. The escaped leader didn't leave a message of his own. The message was what he left behind. A single, gray robe, discarded in an alleyway. When Arashi's clone had found it, it held a faint, residual trace of magic. A tracking spell. They hadn't just been drawn out. They had been marked. The hand of Anksaram wasn't just coming. Now, he knew exactly where to find them. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Heresy of Creation. The victory at Harjan was a hollow one. They had saved Mermaid Heel. But Arashi knew the discarded robe was a deliberate breadcrumb, a piece of tactical arrogance. The Silentium Dei, or at least the lector, now had a way to track them. He could feel it, a faint, parasitic string tied to his chakra. A consequence of his close-range fight. He could suppress it, confuse it, but not remove it without a deeper understanding of its nature. They were living on borrowed time. They used a form of nullification magic, Ultear explained, her brow furrowed in concentration. She, Arashi, Erza, and Kagura were gathered in the now finished main room of their new home. The large, open space with its high, timbered ceiling felt more like a war room than a living room. Books and scrolls, procured by Ultear from a dozen shadowy sources, were spread across a massive wooden table. It wasn't just anti-magic, Ultear continued, pointing to a diagram in a crumbling tone. That just creates a void. This felt active. It unraveled Ethernano at a fundamental level. Why ever read of such a thing in one context? Divine curses. The kind of power wielded by a god. Anksaram, Kagura said, her voice flat. The name tasted like poison. Exactly, Arashi confirmed. He was pacing, his movements restless. The zealot in the fortress, the lector, the power they wield, it all stems from him. We're not fighting a guild or an army. We're fighting a religion, and you can't punch a religion into submission. Then we do what you said before, Erza stated, her logic cutting through the tension. We get smarter. We can't be the only ones who have ever stood against this god. There has to be a record. A weakness. Quote, Ultear tapped a faded map of Fury. There might be. Legends speak of a place called the Archive of the Unwritten. It's said to predate the founding of the Magic Council, even Zirf himself. It was supposedly a repository of knowledge for a civilization of mages who didn't use Ethernano as we do. They practiced a more primordial form of magic. The stories say they were wiped out for their heresy. By who? Kagura asked. The legends don't say, Ultear admitted. They just say their knowledge was deemed too dangerous for the world and was sealed away. Arashi stopped pacing. His sage mode was tingling. Primordial magic. A civilization that didn't use Ethernano. It resonated with what he knew of his own power. Where is it? That's the problem, Ultear said, tracing a path into the heart of the rugged, unforgiving mountain range of Minstrel. It's not on any modern map. The entrance is said to be hidden, protected by ancient traps and guardians that respond not to magical power, but to the purity of one's spirit. Sounds like a load of nonsense, Kagura grumbled. Maybe not, Arashi mused, a thoughtful expression on his face. If their magic was different, their defenses would be too. They wouldn't be designed to stop a powerful mage, but perhaps someone with the wrong intentions. He looked at the three women, a plan forming in his mind. We need that knowledge. We need to know what we're fighting. We leave at dawn. Erza nodded, her hand resting on his shoulder. Together, the Minstrel Mountains were a breathtakingly hostile environment. Jagged peaks clawed at the sky, and the wind howled with a mournful, hungry sound. There were no paths here, no signs of civilization. For 3 days, they traveled, relying on Arashi's enhanced senses to navigate the treacherous terrain and avoid the monstrous beasts that called the peaks home. It was a journey that tested them in new ways. This wasn't a battlefield, it was a wilderness. Erza's tactical mind was put to use charting their course, finding the safest way to ascend sheer cliffs. Kagura's gravity magic became an invaluable tool, lightening their packs during long EKS and creating stable footholds on crumbling ledges. Ultear, surprisingly, proved to be an expert on the local flora, identifying edible plants and those whose pollen could cause paralysis. Arashi acted as their vanguard, his clones scouting ahead, his sage mode detecting avalanches before they started. They worked together seamlessly, a 4-person unit moving with a single purpose. The quiet moments were filled with a growing intimacy. Sharing rations on a cliffside, huddling together for warmth as a blizzard raged outside a small cave, tending to the small cuts and bruises that were an inevitable part of the climb. The vows they had made were being reinforced not by grand declarations, but by the simple, profound act of relying on one another to survive. On the 4th day, Arashi stopped. They were in a high-altitude valley, a place of stunning, desolate beauty. A frozen waterfall stood like a monument of ice against one cliff face. "We're here," he said. His senses were on fire. Behind the waterfall, there was a vast, hollow space, and an energy that felt ancient and familiar. It felt like an echo of his own chakra. "The entrance is behind the ice," Erza asked, assessing the massive wall. "I can melt it," Ultear offered, her hands beginning to glow. "No," Arashi said, holding up a hand. "Look closer." He pointed. In the center of the frozen waterfall, embedded deep within the ice, was a single, intricate locking mechanism made of a strange, dark metal. It had no keyhole. "The purity of one's spirit," Kagura murmured, understanding. "It's a test. A magical lock," then, Erza surmised. "It must require a specific magical signature to open." "Let me try," Ultear said, stepping forward. She placed her hand on the ice near the lock and channeled her arc of time. The lock remained inert. Nothing. Erza tried next, channeling her own powerful magical energy. Again, nothing. Kagura's gravity magic had no effect. It wasn't responding to Ethernano at all. "It's not looking for magic," Arashi said, stepping up to the ice wall. "It's looking for something else." He placed his palm flat against the cold surface, directly over the lock. He didn't push Ethernano. He didn't even push Chakra. He simply cleared his mind and focused on his intent. "We seek knowledge to protect, not to conquer." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the dark metal of the lock began to glow with a soft, blue light. With a sound like a great, sighing breath, the massive frozen waterfall split down the middle, the two halves sliding apart with impossible smoothness, revealing a dark, yawning tunnel. "How did you do that?" Kagura asked, amazed. "I didn't use power," Arashi replied, peering into the darkness. "I just asked." The tunnel was long and dark, descending deep into the mountain. The air grew warmer, and the walls were carved with geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. This was not the work of mages. This was something else entirely. They emerged into a cavern of impossible scale. It was a vast, circular library, but instead of books, the walls were lined with thousands upon thousands of stone tablets, each one covered in a script none of them had ever seen. In the center of the cavern, a beam of soft, white light shone down from an unseen source in the ceiling, illuminating a single, large dais. "The archive of the unwritten," Ultear whispered, her voice filled with reverence and awe. They spread out, their footsteps echoing in the profound silence. Erza ran a gauntleted finger over one of the tablets. "We can't read this." "We don't have to," Arashi said, his attention fixed on the central dais. He walked towards it. On the dais rested a single, perfectly smooth, black stone sphere about the size of a crystal ball. "This is the index." He placed his hand on the sphere. As he did, the script on every tablet in the cavern began to glow. Information flooded his mind, not as words, but as pure concepts, as raw knowledge downloaded directly into his consciousness. It was the entire history of a civilization. He saw them, a race of people, ancient and wise, who called the energy within them Ki, a concept almost identical to chakra. They were the original inhabitants of this land, long before the term, mage, existed. They saw the world not as a source of external eternano to be commanded, but as a sea of natural energy to be harmonized with. They were the original sages. Then he saw the arrival. A being of immense, cosmic power descending from the heavens. Anksaram. He did not arrive as a god of death and life, but as a warden. A gardener. He declared this world his, a place for his great experiment, Ethernano. He seeded the world with this new energy, a lesser, but more easily controlled power source that would allow a new form of life, mages, to flourish. But the key users were an affront to his design. Their power came from within, and from the natural world itself, a source he could not control. He deemed them a heresy, a flaw in his creation. He unleashed his curse, the contradictory curse, not just on one man, but on their entire civilization. The more they loved life, the more their own ki turned against them, withering them from the inside out, turning them to dust. It was a genocide on a planetary scale. The sphere showed him one final, chilling truth. The world, Earth-land, was a closed system, a walled garden. Anksaram's absolute law was the cycle of life and death within it. Arashi's soul, a soul from outside the garden, one that had already completed a cycle and was now beginning another, was the ultimate blasphemy. His chakra was a foreign element, an invasive species that threatened the very foundation of Anksaram's experiment. The Silentium Dei were not just fanatics. They were the garden's antibodies. And he was the disease. He pulled his hand back, gasping, his mind reeling from the sheer weight of the revelations. Arashi. Erza was at his side, steadying him. What did you see? Everything. He breathed, his eyes wide with a horrifying understanding. We're not just fighting his followers. We are fighting this world's fundamental law. We can't win. Before he could explain further, a cold, serene voice echoed from the entrance of the cavern. You are correct. You cannot. They all spun around. A man stood there, framed by the tunnel's darkness. He was tall, and impeccably dressed in a pristine white suit that seemed utterly out of place. He had silver hair, and his eyes were a piercing, glacial blue. He radiated an aura of absolute calm and terrifying power. He was not a mage. He was not a human, not entirely. He was something other. There was no rage in his presence, no malice. Only a profound, unshakable certainty, like gravity or the turning of the planet. My apologies for the intrusion, the man said, his voice smooth as polished marble. My lector's tracking spell was quite effective. He is being disciplined for his failure, but his information was invaluable. To think this place still existed. He looked around the archive with mild, academic curiosity. You must be the anomaly. Arashi Uzumaki. And you are? Arashi asked, stepping in front of the women, his body tensing for a fight. I am Praetor Cassian, the man said with a slight, almost condescending bow. And you might call me the Hand of Anksaram. It is my duty to correct errors in the system. And you, your very existence, is the greatest error of all. Without any warning, he moved. He didn't use a spell or a technique. He simply crossed the 100-foot distance between them in less than a heartbeat. Appearing directly in front of Arashi, Kagura reacted instantly, her sword ablur as she slashed at him. But her blade stopped an inch from his neck, held in place by an invisible force. She grunted, her muscles straining. My gravity, it's not working. Cassian didn't even look at her. Your power warps one of the fundamental constants of this world. A crude but impressive party trick. However, in my presence, such things are discouraged. He flicked a finger, and Kagura was sent flying, crashing into a wall of stone tablets with a sickening crunch. Kagura, Erza screamed, re-equipping instantly into her adamantine armor, the ultimate defensive shield. You'll pay for that, she charged, her massive shield leading the way. Cassian simply held up a hand. The air around him began to shimmer. Not with magic, but with its absence. A field of pure nullification. Erza's charge slammed into this field, and her adamantine armor, which had blocked a blast from Phantom Lord's Jupiter cannon, began to shred, not break, but unravel, dissolving into glittering particles of ethernano. Erza cried out in pain and shock as her strongest defense was peeled away like paper. The nullification field washed over her, and she collapsed, her magical reserves instantly and painfully drained. Crude matter rearrangement, Cassian commented with disinterest. A temporary violation of physical law. Easily corrected. Ultear, her face pale with terror, acted on instinct. Arc of time. Reverse. She tried to cast her spell on Erza's disintegrating armor, to restore it. The moment her magic touched the edge of Cassian's null field, it violently backfired. She screamed, clutching her head as temporal energy ripped through her own body, aging her arm in a horrifying, flickering instant. She collapsed, convulsing. In the space of 5 seconds, the 3 powerful women who stood by his side had been utterly and completely defeated. Arashi stared, his mind refusing to process the scene. The speed, the efficiency, the absolute negation of their powers, this was beyond anything he had ever faced. "You bastard," he roared, the red chakra of Kurama exploding from him. The single-tailed shroud forming instantly. He lunged, his clawed hand swiping at Cassian's throat. His claws met the null field. The red chakra shroud hissed and evaporated on contact, like water on a hot stone. He felt a searing, agonizing pain, not in his body, but in his very soul, as his chakra was forcibly unmade. He was thrown back, the fox shroud dissipating completely. He landed on one knee, gasping. His right arm trembling and smoking, the chakra pathways burned and temporarily severed. Cassian looked down at him, a flicker of genuine surprise in his glacial eyes. "Fascinating. Your energy is not of this world. It is more fundamental, more resilient. It does not nullify as easily as Ethernano." He tilted his head. "It almost feels like the energy of creation itself. What a paradox. That the vessel for such a power would be the ultimate heresy." He took a step toward Arashi. "Do not struggle. This will be painless. I will simply unwrite you. Your soul will be returned to the great nothing from whence it came. Your companions will be cleansed of your taint. The system will be restored to balance." Arashi pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He looked at Erza, struggling to rise, at Kagura, unconscious against the wall, at Ultear, whimpering in pain. He thought of his promise to them, of the home they had built. He would not die here. He had one last resort. A technique he had not used in this life. A gamble that could kill him. He brought his hands together in a complex seal. Cassian's eyes widened slightly. More tricks. Arashi poured every last drop of his remaining chakra, his very life force, into this one technique. The air around him began to distort, not with power, but with a spatial anomaly. It was a forbidden jutsu. A last-ditch escape plan from his Anbu days. "You cannot escape my lord's domain," Cassian said, reaching for him. "Watch me," Arashi gritted out. The space around the 4 of them twisted violently. With a sound like tearing reality, they vanished, leaving a stunned Praetor Cassian alone in the silent, ancient archive. He lowered his hand, an unreadable expression on his face. He looked at the spot where they had been. Then at his own hand, which had a faint, red burn mark where Arashi's chakra had touched him. An unregistered spatial leap, across a vast distance, fueled by pure life force, he murmured to himself. He is more resourceful than the data suggested. And that power, it wounded me. A slow, cold, terrifying smile spread across his face. For the first time in centuries, he had found something that was not just an error to be corrected. It was a challenge. Reality reasserted itself with a gut-wrenching lurch. They reappeared not in Magnolia, but in a desolate, windswept salt flat hundreds of miles away. The uncontrolled spatial leap had scattered them. Arashi collapsed, vomiting blood. His body was shutting down. He had burned through nearly all of his chakra, and a significant portion of his own life force to power the jump. His vision was tunneling to black. He saw Erza, her magic gone, crawling towards him. He saw Kagura, stirring, a deep gash on her forehead. And he saw Ultear, her body racked with temporal spasms, trying to drag herself to her feet. They were alive, but they were broken, beaten, and for the first time since he had arrived in this world, Arashi Uzumaki felt the cold, bitter sting of absolute and total defeat. His power, their power, the bonds they shared, it had meant nothing. They hadn't just lost, they had been dismissed. As his consciousness faded, his last thought was a terrifying one. They couldn't fight this enemy. They couldn't outrun him. They couldn't win. Not as they were. Chapter 6. The Unbroken Covenant. The whirl. D returned to Arashi not as a gentle dawn, but as a throbbing, persistent pain that seemed to radiate from the very marrow of his bones. He was lying on a soft bed, the scent of antiseptic herbs and clean linen filling his nostrils. A cool, damp cloth was resting on his forehead. He tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea and a grinding exhaustion forced him back down. His chakra coils felt like frayed, burned wires. He was empty. "Don't move, you idiot." The voice was rough, but laced with a profound relief. He turned his head. Erza was sitting in a chair beside his bed. She was pale, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. But she was whole. She was wearing a simple cotton dress, not her armor. It made her look younger, more vulnerable. "Where?" he rasped, his throat dry. "A fairy tale safe house. One of the old ones Master Makarov established during the war with Phantom Lord," she explained, offering him a cup of water. He drank greedily. "We're in the foothills west of Clover. It took us 2 days to get here." Memories flooded back. The salt flats. The blood. The crushing defeat. Kagura, Ultear. "They're alive," Erza said, a muscle in her jaw tightening. "Kagura has a severe concussion and several broken ribs. Wendy is with her now. She's been a godsend." She paused, her gaze turning towards the window. "Ultear is worse." The temporal backlash from Cassian's field did more than just burn her. It destabilized her. Her own magic is eating her alive from the inside. Perliuzica is trying to create a potion to anchor her, but she didn't need to finish the sentence. Arashi closed his eyes, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. "It's my fault. I led you all into that." He felt a hand on his. It was Erza's. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from years of wielding a sword. "No," she said, her voice fierce, leaving no room for argument. "We chose to go. We chose to stand with you. This defeat is ours, not just yours. Do not dare take that from us." He opened his eyes and looked at her. In her gaze, he saw not blame, but an unshakable, stubborn solidarity. She was not his subordinate to be protected. She was his partner. The door creaked open, and Makarov entered. His usual boisterous energy replaced by a heavy gravity. "He's awake," the master observed. He looked at Arashi, his eyes ancient and perceptive. "You faced the hand of Anksaram and lived to tell the tale. Not many in history can claim that." "We didn't face him," Arashi corrected, his voice bitter. "We were swatted like flies. And yet, you are here," Makarov countered. "You are alive, and so are your companions. That, in itself, is a victory. Now, the question is, what do you do with it?" That was the question that haunted them for the next week. The safe house, a cozy cottage hid, den in a pocket dimension accessible only through a disguised well, became a place of recovery and grim contemplation. While Wendy and Perliuzica worked tirelessly to stabilize Kagura and Ultear, Aras High and Erza began to dissect their defeat. "His power is absolute nullification," Arashi said, sketching a diagram on a piece of parchment. They were in the cottage's small library, the air thick with the smell of old paper. "It doesn't counter magic, it erases it. It breaks down Ethernano into nothing. That's why your requip unraveled and Ultear's magic backfired. You were feeding your power into a furnace. And your chakra?" Erza asked, tracing the lines of his diagram. He said it was more resilient. "Chakra is a mixture of spiritual and physical energy," Arashi explained, the old lessons from his academy days surfacing. "It's part of my body, my very soul. His field can't erase my soul, but it can violently disrupt the energy it produces. It's like trying to put out a chemical fire with water. It doesn't work, and it makes a bigger mess." He stood up, pacing the small room. "We can't fight him on his terms. Power against null power doesn't work. It's like rock trying to beat paper. We can't win by playing the same game." He stopped, a sudden, wild idea sparking in his mind. "So we have to change the rules. We have to create something new." Erza looked at him, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" "His absolution field, as he called it, targets magic and my chakra individually," Arashi theorized, his voice gaining speed and excitement. "It's designed to deconstruct known energy types. What if we were to create an energy that is neither? Something that is not on his list of things to erase." "A unison raid," Erza suggested. "More," Arashi said, shaking his head. A unison. Raid is two mages combining their spells. The Ethernano is still Ethernano. It would be like throwing two different kinds of gasoline on his fire. No, I'm talking about a true fusion. A complete merging of our energies at a fundamental level. My chakra, your equip, Kagura's gravity change, Ultear's arc of time. We wouldn't be casting a spell together. We would be becoming the spell. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a desperate, brilliant light. I call it the Unison Covenant. A pact not of magic, but of will. We would weave our life forces together, creating a singular power that this world has never seen. Something that is not in Anksaram's library. Something he has no defense against, because it has never existed before. Erza stared at him, the sheer audacity of the idea taking her breath away. To merge not just their magic, but their very souls. It was terrifying. It was intimate. It was their only chance. How? She whispered. I don't know, he admitted. But we're going to figure it out. The training began as a process of healing. Kagura was the first to rejoin them. Her body was still bruised, but the fire in her eyes had returned, tempered now with a quiet humility. She found Arashi meditating by a small waterfall behind the cottage. I was weak, she said, her voice flat. We were all outmatched, Arashi corrected, not opening his eyes. No, she insisted. My strength has always been tied to my blade. To my hate. When he dismissed my sword, he dismissed me. She sat down beside him. For a long while, she was silent. Then, she unbuckled her sheathed katana, the archenemy, and laid it on the ground between them. This sword was my vow to avenge Simon, she said softly. It was a symbol of my hatred for Jelal. For 10 years, it was my entire world. She looked at Arashi, her gaze unwavering. You have faced Jelal. Erza has forgiven him. Ultear worked to redeem him. My hatred is the last lingering poison from the Tower of Heaven. She drew the blade. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, its edge impossibly sharp. To be a part of this covenant that you speak of, I cannot have this poison inside me. I cannot merge my will with yours if it is still shackled to the past. With a sharp cry, she raised the sword and brought it down with all her might against a large granite boulder. The blade, a legendary weapon, shattered into a dozen pieces with a sound like a breaking heart. Tears streamed down Kagura's face as she stared at the broken shards. It's over, she whispered. The vengeance is over. She looked at Arashi, her expression one of painful, liberating release. From now on, I will not wield a blade for what I have lost. I will raise my hands to protect what I have found. Arashi finally opened his eyes. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. Welcome back, Kagura. He saw it then. Her spirit, once a tightly coiled tempest of grief, was now open and free. Ready. Erza's trial was more internal. Arashi's the Ori required her to do more than just project her magic. She had to open the very core of her being, the personal reality where she stored her armors and weapons. It was her soul's sanctuary, the one place that was hers and hers alone. They trained in a wide clearing, Arashi guiding her through meditative exercises. Your requip isn't just storage magic, he explained. It's a manifestation of your will. Your armor is not just a tool. It's a part of you. The armor you choose reflects the person you were in that moment. To merge with us, you can't just lend us a sword. You have to lower the drawbridge to your heart. For days, she struggled. Her control was too perfect, her discipline too rigid. She could channel her magic, but she couldn't release the source. I can't do it, she said one afternoon, frustrated. Slumping to the ground. My whole life, my armor has been my defense. Not just physically, it's what keeps me together. To just let go of it. Then don't let go, Arashi said, sitting in front of her. Let us in. He took her hands. Erza, look at me. You don't have to be Titania, queen of the fairies. You don't have to be the unbreakable shield. Not with us. You can be just Erza. The girl who shared her bread with a starving boy. The woman who can cry and laugh and be afraid. That's the person we need. That's the person I love. His words struck a chord deep within her. He wasn't asking for her power. He was asking for her trust. She looked at his earnest, open face, and the walls she had so carefully maintained for years began to crumble. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and focused not on her power, but on her feelings for him, for Kagura, for Ultear. On her love for her chaotic family back at the guild. A soft, golden light began to emanate from her, warm and brilliant. It wasn't the fierce light of her Jupiter-level armors, but the gentle, radiant glow of her very soul laid bare. She had done it. The greatest challenge was Ultear. Her condition was deteriorating. The temporal spasms were becoming more frequent, her body flickering between ages, her life force unraveling. Perliuzuka's potions were only a stopgap. Arashi found her one night in her room, curled up, her body shivering despite the warm blankets. She looked like a frightened child. "It's no use," she whispered, her voice weak. "My own magic is my executioner." It's ironic. A-fi. TTINGN for someone who played God with time. "Stop talking like that," Arashi said, his voice firm but gentle. He sat on the edge of her bed. "You are not a sin to be erased. You are a vital part of this family. We need you. I need you." Quote, "But my magic is poison," she cried, a fresh wave of spasms racking her body. "Then we'll make it the antidote," he said, his resolve hardening. He placed his hand on her forehead, pouring a steady, calming stream of his own chakra into her. It wasn't a cure, but it soothed the temporal storm raging within her. "Your arc of time is not just about destruction. It is the magic of causality, of potential. It can restore broken things. It can accelerate growth. It is the magic of possibilities." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "Cassian's power is about finality, absolution, an end. Your power is the opposite. It's about the future, about second chances. You are the key, Ultear. You are the only one who can weave the threads of our power together to create a future for a moment that does not yet exist." His belief in her was a tangible thing, a force more potent than any medicine. She stared at him, her tear-filled eyes wide with a dawning realization. All her life, she had seen her magic as a tool for her own selfish desires, and then as a curse to atone for. He saw it as a miracle. Slowly, tentatively, she began to focus. Not on fighting her magic, but on guiding it. She reached out with her senses, feeling Arashi's steady chakra, Erza's radiant spirit, Kagura's grounded will. She stopped seeing her arc of time as a personal power and started seeing it as a loom, a tool to weave their disparate energies into a single, cohesive tapestry. The spasms began to lessen. Her breathing evened out. A faint, silver light began to glow around her hands. Stable and controlled, she was not cured, but she had found her purpose. She was the weaver. While they healed and trained, the world outside moved on. Praetor Cassian, true to his arrogant nature, did not launch a covert attack. He began a systematic, terrifyingly public campaign. He and his Silentium Dei, now operating openly, appeared at the gates of the Magic Council's capital, Erza. The nullification field was deployed. The city's magical defenses, including the super weapon Jupiter, were rendered inert. The council, the most powerful governing body in the nation, was brought to its knees without a single death. Cassian didn't destroy them. He simply delivered a message, one that was broadcast across the continent via a hijacked Lacrima network. He stood before the powerless, humiliated council members, his voice calm and authoritative. The anomaly, Arashi Uzumaki, and his corrupted consorts, Erza Scarlet, Kagura Mikazuki, and Ultear Milkovich, are a disease upon this world. Their very existence invites chaos and defies the sacred law of life and death. They are responsible for the dragon attack, a cosmic imbalance drawn to their unnatural power. They are the harbingers of destruction. He painted them as the villains, using logic and fear as his weapons. He wasn't a ranting madman. He was a divine prosecutor, laying out his case against them. We have isolated the source of the corruption to the town of Magnolia. To prevent its spread, a quarantine is now in effect. No one enters. No one leaves. The anomaly and his followers have one W. Each to surrender themselves for purification. If they refuse, Magnolia and all who reside within it will be cleansed. The choice is theirs. The message was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. He had turned the world against them, isolating them, and placing the lives of everyone in fairy tale squarely on their shoulders. In the safe house, they watched the broadcast, their faces grim. He's cornered us, Erza said, her hands clenched into fists. He's laid a siege, Kagura added. Arashi stared at Cassian's smug face on the lacrima screen. He felt a cold, familiar rage building inside him. This was pain, all over again. A self-righteous god holding his home hostage. The training was no longer an option. It was a necessity. They gathered in the clearing, the air heavy with unspoken urgency. Arashi, Erza, Kagura, and Ultear stood in a circle, their expressions set with grim determination. "It's time," Arashi said. "No matter what happens, we do not break the circle. We hold on to each other." They joined hands. Arashi began, releasing his chakra not as a weapon, but as a gentle, flowing river. Erza followed, her golden spiritual light blooming, letting down her final barriers. Kagura grounded them, her will a solid, unshakable anchor of gravity. Finally, Ultear, her silver light shimmering, began to weave. She didn't just mix their powers. She used her arc of time to find the future potential of their bond. She took Arashi's life-based chakra, Erza's materialized will, and Kagura's mastery over a fundamental constant, and she accelerated their harmonization, forcing them to become one. The energy in the clearing became immense, a swirling vortex of gold, blue, deep violet, and silver. It was volatile, unstable, threatening to tear them apart. They gritted their teeth, their bodies trembling with the strain. They held on, their grip on each other's hands the only thing keeping them from being consumed. Their individual wills were dissolving, merging, becoming a single consciousness, a single purpose. They were no longer four people. They were one. As their power finally stabilized into a single, cohesive, shimmering aura of iridescent light, a massive Krohe. Seishin appeared in the sky above Magnolia, visible for 100 miles. It was the face of Praetor Cassian, his expression serene and utterly confident. His voice boomed across the land, a divine proclamation. "Arashi Uzumaki, your time is up. I have encased your precious city in a sphere of absolution. All magic within its walls is now inert. Your friends, your family, they are powerless. Come to me, face me, or watch them all be erased from existence." The projection faded, leaving behind the horrifying sight of a shimmering, semi-transparent dome of black energy covering the entire town of Magnolia. In the clearing, the four of them stood within their shared aura of power, their covenant forged. They looked up at the imprisoned city, at the blatant challenge. The time for hiding, for training, was over. The final battle had been called. Chapter 6 End.